Chapter 1407. Oh, what a rare guest. I didn't think that you, Duque, would actually come looking for me. But this is the Moon Goddess Church. As soon as the host and guest were seated, Tyron's dignified, flawless, and holy face blushed for a moment. Act. Continue acting. Sometimes, Duque felt sorry for the night elves. The spokesperson of the goddess they believed in, the high priestess Tyron, had already been fed to the wolves in order to win the war of the ancients 10,000 years ago. Her moral integrity had been crushed in the process of Duque's evil fantasies. Ahem. Duque coughed dryly and put on a straight face. I'm here to talk business. Oh. Since Duque said it was business, Tyron, who was dressed in priestess robes, immediately straightened her attitude and sat opposite Duque with her most flawless appearance. She raised her hand gently, her posture as elegant as a painting. Commander, please speak your mind. It's about the War of the Ancients, the time I spent with you in Azhara's palace. Before Duque could finish, Tyron's face, which she had put on a dignified expression with great difficulty, immediately turned red. Damn it, you're still saying that you're not messing with me? I already said that this is the Moon Goddess Church. The goddess will definitely pay attention to this place. No. I'm talking about Selaja. Duque said firmly. Tyron's eyes widened, and there was some hesitation in them. After thinking about the latest reports from the Alliance, she immediately understood everything. You suspect that Selaja is the current Vashj? Yes. Looks like you've made your choice. Indeed. Duque smiled bitterly. He had no reason to fall out with Jaina just to subdue an unknown Selaja, Vashj. I understand. You're here to seek enlightenment. Perhaps. I'm someone who cherishes old friendships. If it's someone I don't know, whether he lives or dies has nothing to do with me. If necessary, I can easily destroy him. But old friends. Duque stuttered. He suddenly realized that being a leader was very painful, especially being the leader of the Alliance. Or perhaps it was because the situations he faced in the past were always black and white. Are you an anti-party? If that's the case, I'll beat you to death. You aren't going to go against the Alliance, right? As long as you kill the Burning Legion with me, everything will be fine. Duque could even forgive the beast men who had committed countless evil deeds, and he could ignore the existence of Orgrim and Anastrian. However, he felt uncomfortable killing a maidservant who had served him before. Tyron spoke softly. The Moon Goddess, Elun, always taught us to look at problems from multiple perspectives. For example, although the Nagas and the fell orcs are our enemies, they are not truly evil. Tyron's words shocked Duque. If the other radicals in the Alliance were to find out what you said, you would probably be criticized by many, right? Tyron smiled and continued, be it the beastmen of the old tribes, the fell beastmen or the Naga, they are all beastmen. They came to this world or Draenor to seek land in order to survive. Although to them, humans, the current night elves, and the Draenei are all enemies, their actions are not evil. Their desires are essentially good. Since they are good, one day, when they realize the destructiveness of the Burning Legion, they will take on important responsibilities in this world. This argument made Duque's jaw drop. As long as one is an intelligent being, there will be conflicts due to all sorts of conflicts, and the factors that differentiate them as friends or enemies are benefits and losses. It is a pity that we are now in such an extreme era, an era of despair where we cannot survive without the Burning Legion being destroyed. Be it the Moon Goddess or I, we are not willing to think of building an alliance that only relies on strong combat power in such a situation. Because this will lead us to the path of evil. At the end of the day, we are not united just to defeat our enemies. We are raising our weapons for our comrades, and even the future of the entire planet. So, if there is a chance, be it you or Jaina, learn to forgive. After Tyron finished speaking, Duque was completely silent. After a long time, Duque finally squeezed out a sentence, "Forgive." Tyron smiled. After joining the alliance, I have always heard people say that the prosperity and power of the alliance today is forged through military force, the result of the great leader Duke Marcus's leadership. Is that true? Not at all. Duque was resolute. I have never felt that the alliance is solely due to my efforts. This is an alliance forged from the dreams of countless people. Countless people abandoned their leisure, and invested their imagination, energy, and physical strength into it. A mere Duke Marcus can't build so many flying warships, tanks, and attack every inch of land in Azeroth and Draenor. Tyron's smile became even wider. Then I would like to ask, in the 2,800 years of the rise of the human race, did no one fight against the elves or dwarves? Who didn't fight? Where there are people, there is paste. The violent dwarves and Stormwind had a lot of friction, but after understanding each other, they became strong allies. After hearing this, Duque finally understood what Tyron meant. Alright, in the past, people told me that the priests were all charlatans, and I didn't believe them at first. Today, I have finally seen it for myself. You've been beating around the bush for so long. It seems like you've told me everything, but at the same time, you haven't. Tyron smiled like a flower, hee. You are a true demigod of Azeroth, you have no right to call me a charlatan. Pfft. He was used to the thinking of mortals, and didn't have that many thoughts of being superior to the rest of the world. Alright, I understand what you and Elun are trying to say. As long as there is anger in your heart, let's fight. Until one side is done. After that, I, the guide, will have to deal with the aftermath. Oh please, this is a death grudge. Tyron sat down and leaned on Duke, rubbing herself against him. Duke Marcus, the only person in the alliance who has the aura of a legend, the man who can always make the impossible possible, the partner of me, Jaina, and other outstanding women. This matter depends on you. If you can't do it beautifully, how can you think that you have the right to be loved by the 7 noble ladies? Alright, charlatan is right. Duque replied impatiently. I really hope that one day, every race in the alliance can create an ideal world without war. When that time comes, I won't have to work so hard, mediating disputes every day, and doing all sorts of things. Alright, I won't let you down. Chapter 1408. Tyron sent Duque to the main entrance of the Moon Goddess's temple. Duque opened the portal and looked up at the bright moon in the sky. That was the light of the Moon Goddess. For the past 25,000 years, this light had shone on the land of Azeroth every night. That kind of gentle radiance that contained divinity, just one glance was enough to make one remember its glittering pride forever. Elun had witnessed the rise and fall of Azeroth. From the tragic slaughter of the Dark Empire to the shocking ancient war 10,000 years ago. She had worked tirelessly to heal this scarred world for a long time. The goddess Elun was respectable and praiseworthy. On the surface, Duque was here to communicate with Tyron, but in reality, he was also greeting Elun. Regardless of whether Vashj succeeded or not, he had to report it to Elun. Since Tyron had repeatedly mentioned forgiveness, it was okay. Sigh. Duque sighed softly. Elun was worried sick about Queen Azhara and the other fallen night elves. They did not believe in the goddess and blindly pursued power in their uncontrollable domain. In the end, they attracted the Burning Legion and played out a typical example of playing with fire. Not only did they harm themselves, but they also caused the entire continent to sink, and billions of lives were lost. No matter how one looked at it, Elun's heart could be said to be great. If these bastards were Duque's subordinates, they would have been killed long ago, and not even their souls would be left. Only Elun would be willing to forgive and hope to guide them back on the right path. Of course, Elun could not publicly issue an oracle to support Duque's actions. As the commander of the alliance, it was one thing for Duque to take in the Nagas as his underlings. As the only true goddess of the Night Elves, it was another thing for her to do it publicly. If this kind of guy who abandoned his compatriots and allowed demons to slaughter his compatriots could be easily forgiven, what would the Night Elves who had supported Elun for more than 10,000 years think? This was a major matter that would affect the foundation of the goddess's believers. Therefore, the goddess could not step forward and could only agree to Duque to do it in a tacit manner. Back in Karazhan, Duque immediately followed his instructions. "Oh, Vashch, are you Suleika?" "Oh, it doesn't matter. There's no future for you to follow Queen Azhara or the Burning Legion. Hurry up and throw yourself into the arms of Master Duque. Master will bring you along to show off and fly." It wasn't that Duque hadn't thought about it. Once his aura of a tortoise rose, Miss Vashch would immediately bow her head and call him master. Unfortunately, he could only dream about it. None of the ancient gods ran a charity, so how could Enzos treat Queen Azhara like a treasure? Not to mention Vashch, the queen's maid. The queen was almost begging for food, so how could the maids be any better? In any case, regardless of whether she was Celia or not, she couldn't escape the dark history of being thrown into the pitch-black, boundless deep sea and suffering for 10,000 years. Let's get rid of the foreign aid first. Duque sighed slightly. In the days that followed, the alliance advanced on 3 fronts. The Horde gathered almost all the mobile forces that could be used and ran to attack Ochinton in the south of Terakar Forest, trying to open up the road to Nagrand. After realizing that he couldn't deal with Vashch well, William had no choice but to lead the main force of the alliance to expand in Terakar Forest. In order to ensure supplies from the Hellfire Peninsula to Shotrath City, they first took care of the Raven Nest at the west side of the Thorns Rampart rocky grounds and beat the Crow people inside until they were covered in feathers. Then, they entered Turum at the south side of the Thorns Rampart rocky grounds and took care of the former Drenii who had turned into a lunatic. Finally, the alliance began to build a new stronghold in the south of Terakar Forest near the Moon Shadow Valley. Originally, this stronghold would be named Aurelia Stronghold, to commemorate the heroine Aurelia who had disappeared in the Outland War. But in this life, Aurelia had never gone to the Outland. Moreover, the next person to guard the stronghold would be the 4th sister of the Windrunner family, Lilith, who was better at fighting in the jungle. Thus, this stronghold was renamed Windrunner Stronghold. The battles on these 2 fronts were fought in accordance with the rules. There were no surprises, and naturally, no surprises. The entire alliance's attention was attracted by the battle in Zengermarsh. The other side said that it was led by Bulang Bronzebeard, but everyone knew that Bulang was a short-tempered dwarf and couldn't fight such a delicate multi-threaded attack. Time entered December. After consolidating the dam at Dark Swamp Village Waterfall, the Alliance mobilized more than 50 flying ships of various types from Azeroth. Only less than 1/5 of the warships were left, and the rest were all simple flying transport ships. 2 large propellers, coupled with the new diesel engine and a huge metal cargo hold that looked like a goldfish with a big belly, that was a transport ship. The Alliance and Horde weren't good at fighting in swamps, right? Alright, I'll fill the swamps. Lakes and everything else will be filled up. What seemed like a fantasy was nothing in the face of the Alliance's incomparably powerful transportation capabilities. A smaller flying transport ship could carry 500 tons of sand. A larger one could carry 3,000 tons. From day to night, these transport ships did nothing but work in 3 shifts. Under the cover of the flying warships and other air forces, they loaded sand onto the mountains of Hellfire Peninsula. Then the first step was to fill up Dark Swamp Lake, which was located between Nagrand in the west, Terakar Forest in the south, and Hellfire Peninsula in the east. I'm not as good as you in water battles. Alright, now I'll force you to fight me on land. Let's see how you Naga can act. Facing a transport ship that could drop sand from 500 meters in the air, the Naga side really couldn't do anything. In the Outland where magic was chaotic, no one's magic could be blasted out more than 500 meters. There were so many bosses in the Serpent Shrine, but none of them could fly. They could only stare at the Kiraji bugmen flying around in the sky and the small boss Shatura. The water in the swamp area wasn't deep to begin with. After a few rounds of dropping sand, the waterways leading to Dark Swamp Lake were all filled up. Unless the Naga had the ability to deal with sand better than the Alliance. Whether it was eating it and pulling it into the void, or using magic to make it disappear, as long as they couldn't deal with the sand, they had no choice but to accept the cruel fact that the area they controlled was decreasing every day. When the Alliance used sand to divide Dark Swamp Lake into 7 or 8 pieces, the efficiency of filling up the lake increased. Under the cover of the Air Force, the fearless dwarves drove diesel bulldozers and started filling up the lake. There was no solution to this kind of shameless fighting style. As a last resort, on the 12th of December, the fell orcs once again appeared in the original filling area of Dark Swamp Lake. Unexpectedly, when the fell orcs were more than a kilometer away from the water's edge, a group of Griffin Knights and Hippogriphon archers immediately rushed up. And then, there was no then. Chapter 1409. Duque's actions were obviously taking advantage of Illidan's lack of air force. This method was quite extreme and could be said to be shameless. However, it could solve the problem that the Alliance wasn't good at water battles and didn't have enough experts. If it was a complete nature, it would always be reclaiming land from a lake. Once there was a flood, it would be a big problem. Not Delano. As a planet whose core was already broken and in a half-destroyed state, it was already a miracle that it could maintain air. The situation in the outer realms could no longer be explained by science. Since there weren't so many rules and restrictions, Duque could naturally use his imagination to create trouble. After a month, Dark Swamp Lake and its surrounding areas, which spanned nearly 100 square kilometers, had been completely filled with soil. After repeated tests by the gnome craftsmen, the ground met the requirements. However, Illidan's men did not know what was going on. On the 25th of December, nearly 100,000 fell orc soldiers and ogres dressed in coarse beast skins crossed the shallow waterway near the lagoon in the middle of Zengermarsh and entered the current Dark Swamp Plains. Originally, their attack was to destroy the Alliance's lake-filling project. Who knew that along the way, the human sentry towers were all empty? As the sentry towers were constructed with reinforced concrete, even the ogres had to expend a great deal of effort to destroy the half-built sentry towers. Using a hammer to hit those sturdy little bunkers was even more of a loss. Often, even if the hammer was broken, it might not even make a hole. However, the Beastman army was still advancing forward, and their progress was unbelievably smooth. Even Kargath Bladefist, who was supervising the battle from afar, could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly. As one of the few tribal chiefs who had seen the power of the Alliance's artillery, he had no choice but to deal with the orders from above timidly. If he had a choice, he definitely wouldn't choose to attack the Alliance in such a terrain. It was a pity that Illidan wasn't here. The orders of the second-in-command of the organization, Vashch, wasn't something that he, the newly defeated Beastman leader, could resist. Although Kargatha's temperament was irascible, he still carefully divided the 100,000 fell orcs under his command into 5 echelons. With a loose formation that was almost equivalent to a human line of soldiers, he allowed the fell orcs to advance forward. To the evil beastmen, who were still in the era of cold weapons, it could only be said that there was no other way. Of course, concentrating troops would allow them to display their close combat prowess, but the Alliance's cannons weren't to be trifled with. In one morning, they had advanced nearly 20 kilometers. It was more like an armed parade than a march. Kargath became even more agitated. Right at this moment, a muffled sound of thunder came from the distant sky. Human cannons. Get down! Kargath shouted almost immediately. When being bombarded, quickly get down, or else there would be a higher chance of being hit by the shrapnel and reaping your life. This was common knowledge in the Alliance army, and many orcs in the new tribe of Azeroth knew about it. The problem was that these blockheads in Draenor didn't understand at all. Moreover, after drinking the evil demon's blood, his intelligence began to break through the lower limit. Lie down? What do you mean lie down? That cowardly warlord of his couldn't be scared, right? Ha ha ha. Not only the fell orcs in the distance, but even Kargatha's personal guards were loudly mocking Kargath. This was the inherent thinking of the orcs, who were behind the times. Before they saw real technology and schemes, they didn't know what was scary. Perhaps they were not intelligent enough to understand this. In any case, there was only one word in their dictionary: reckless. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Black Pearl, Duque, Hoof Imriel, and Bulang looked into the distance together. Sitting on this flying warship that could barely be dismantled and transported over through the dark portal, and then reassembled into the largest flying warship, the stability was greatly improved. If it was any other ship, Duque was afraid that his hoof would vomit, and he would kneel before seeing what he wanted her to see. Hey hey. Mark. Didn't you say you wanted me to see something new? Firing cannons again, what's the point? Come to think of it, I've been burying steaks so much that I want to vomit. Imriel swayed the little tail on her butt. For some reason, Duque had the urge to play with the tail. Of course, he resisted. This was a taboo for the Draenei, especially the females. In response to Imriel's ridicule, Duque smiled. At this point in time, Imriel was still very inexperienced. She was practically a newbie who hadn't even left the beginner's village. Throwing her to the front lines to fight with the orcs, even if Duque was willing, Valen would feel the pinch. He might as well send her to bury the magic net node pillars. The elements in the Outland were too chaotic, and it was not easy to maintain the orderly circulation of the elements. Before connecting with Shotrath City, if the magic net in Azeroth was the gigabit fiber broadband before transmigration, then in the Outland, it was the pitiful old 256K dial-up water pipe. How could it not be widened? And not having enough nodes meant that there was not enough Wi-Fi. Not having enough transmission distance meant that Mark Dooku's movement area was restricted. This was unforgivable. The reinforcement of the network these days was not only to increase the magic net's capacity, but also to replace that damned 100 megabit router with a gigabit-class enterprise router. Of course, the most important thing was that Duque had finally found a new source of magic for the magic net. That's right, it was that Neru from Shotrath City. It was impossible for Duque to learn from a certain fellow and treat the Neru as a simple little son, a magic juicer. But where there was a Neru, the weather was generally good, and the elements were orderly and peaceful. After obtaining Valen's consent, Duque got Solarian to set up a new elemental absorption spell formation in Shotrath City, absorbing the 4 major elements around Shotrath City into the magic net. It was no exaggeration to say that with the magic support of Shotrath City, Mark Dooku's current strength was more than twice as strong as when he first entered the Outland. He was 100% a Radiant Moon Archmage, puppet. Speaking of which, the hoof had done so much work, and Duque was also happy to tease this amusing hoof. He raised his hand and pointed into the distance. Look, the plane, fly, plane. Duque blushed. A slip of the tongue. Look at that mass of dark clouds. If Duque had not mentioned it, not many people would have known what the volley of cannons was for. A large mass of dark clouds gathered above the muddy ground of Dark Swamp Lake at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, accompanied by a golden bolt of lightning, heavy rain came pouring down. In a few breaths, the originally soft ground had turned into mud. Duque waved his hand in a cool manner, like a conductor waving his right hand in a beautiful arc. I call this artificial rain. Chapter 14:10. Artificial rain? The technology of the Alliance was so advanced that they could even control rain? Regardless of what was going on, it was so high class. Hoof crossed his fingers, and his tail spun like an electric fan. His pair of bright eyes were like the starry eyes of a star chaser. What? What an amazing feeling. Hoof used the most realistic performance to demonstrate what it meant to be amazing even though he did not understand it. On the side of the ship, Bulang did not care, do. Mark, no matter how you make the little girl happy, even I can't understand it now. Why can't even I understand it now? What are you going to do with this rain? You even called Sar here. Duque had long since discovered the movements of the fell orcs. This time, he personally called Sar here in the name of his main body. At this moment, in the mushroom forest not far below, Sar was waiting for orders with 5,000 beastman warriors. Orgrim, Duque told me to send people to receive a large number of fell orc captives, but I saw that the Alliance did not send many troops. Can Duque really do it? Sar asked. Never underestimate Duke Marcus. He is a miraculous man. His miraculous thinking had long since been proven in many battles. Since we are allies, let us wait patiently. He never disappoints his allies, Orgrim answered gruffly. Perhaps this was a kind of sorrow. They had to trust their former enemies. But it was precisely because they were enemies that they understood each other the best. Sar and Orgrim were extremely conflicted. In the sky, on the Black Pearl, Duque smiled faintly. Magic can do many things that mortals cannot. In fact, science can also do many things that magic can do. For example, this. Duque waved his hand, and instantly, several flying transport ships lowered their altitude and rushed towards the front of the fell orc army. Enemy attack. This time, no one laughed at Kargath Blade Fist. Because as long as one was not blind, they could see that those big-bellied ships were sprinkling something black in front of the fell orc army. What is that? Imriel blinked. Duque shook his head, as if he was possessed by Zhu Guliang. As a general, one must know the heavens above and the earth below. Otherwise, he would definitely be killed by the enemy. Well, Imriel, what wind is it today? Imriel blinked again. I don't know. Duque rolled his eyes. Old Willen had never taught this hoof how to judge the direction of the wind. Duque sighed. It's easy to know the direction of the wind. You just need to throw a light object into the sky and see where it falls. Then, you'll know where the wind is coming from and where it's going. Oh. The hoof was a good student and also a student that made Teacher Du vomit blood. Because after the hoof agreed, it actually picked up a pebble from the deck and threw it into the sky. The pebble flew to a height of 2 meters above the deck and naturally fell straight down. Imriel got the answer. She patted her chest and said confidently, I know. The wind is blowing up and down today. Advantage or disadvantage? What if *king upwind or downwind? There was actually such a mind-numbing operation. Bulang felt that his brain was lacking oxygen. Duque felt like a middle school physics teacher was being scolded by a dog over and over again. Duque stretched out his twitching hand and threw a feather into the sky. Naturally, the wind from the east blew the feather to the west. See that? That's what I call a lighter thing. Well, the sun rises from the east, and it's morning, so it's the east. Before Duque could finish, the hoof had already hit him 3 times. The pebble is not light? I think the pebble is very light. The sun in the world of Draenor rises from the west. Why can't I think of it as the left and right winds? Du vomited 3 liters of blood. Sargeras, Archimond, Nesario, Nefarian, and Galineros, these powerful enemies that made the world tremble had never defeated Duque, but the hoof did. Damn, could it be that he had met a fake hoof, Imriel, in this life? Although Duque did not think that Imriel was retarded, wasn't it too difficult to train a problem child? All right. I'd rather choose to launch a suicidal charge against the Burning Legion. While he was nagging, the Alliance casually fired a few fire arrows and immediately rolled up a terrifying 3-story high wall of fire in the east of the entire Fel Orc army. Ho ho ho. There was no need for combustibles. The black oil residue that fell from the sky was the most terrifying flammable thing. Any Fel Orc who dared to rush into the wall of fire would be burned into charcoal by the fire that had just been ignited. As the transport ship continued to release oil in mid-air, the fire continued to spread forward along the course of the transport ship. In that moment of distraction, the sea of fire had already formed a U-shape and surrounded the Fel Orc army from the east, south, and north. The line of soldiers that was originally 3 kilometers wide was now compressed by the fierce fire. Don't be afraid. Kargath tried to stabilize the Fel Orcs who were starting to run back. At this moment, the Alliance warships in the sky began to fire. Dozens of artillery shells landed at the forefront of the Fel Orc vanguard and exploded right in the middle of the 100 or so infantrymen gathered there. With a series of loud explosions, the Fel Orc army was instantly covered in blood and flesh. It was not just artillery fire. Even more flying ships flew above the Fel Orc vanguard and dropped 500-pound bombs. The artillery shells and bombs opened up a large series of craters on the ground. The stones that were blown up and the stone mushrooms, along with the green severed limbs, fell like hail on the heads of the surrounding Fel Orcs. For a moment, screams and groans of pain were heard. In the face of the fire and explosions, the defeated army that had been chased out of the Hellfire Peninsula by the Alliance not long ago remembered the horror. Although the evil demon's blood made them violent, it was the instinct of most creatures to fear fire. The morale of the Fel Orc army collapsed. They did not care if there were still troops behind them. They turned around and ran faster than rabbits. The unexpected also happened at this moment. The land that had no problems when they came and would not leave footprints when they stepped on it had all turned into mud under the heavy rain. At this moment it was even more terrifying than the mud. What made the orcs even more uncomfortable was that countless steel ropes suddenly fell from the sky. The ropes themselves did not have much lethality. The thick-skinned Fel Orcs were at most dizzy from being smashed. What happened next was more terrifying. Perhaps every transmigrator had this kind of experience. They put the earphone cable in their pocket and in a few moments, it became a mess. The situation now was similar. These ropes, which were supposed to be used to fix the ship, were easily mixed with the mud and became the most terrifying capture attack. Countless Fel Orcs huddled in the mud that was less than 4 kilometers wide and rolled around, fighting each other. Often, when one of them got up, the rope on his leg would trip another Fel Orc. The scene was extremely comical. In the distance, Sar and Orgrim were simply dumbfounded. There was actually such a thing? Chapter 14:11. To be honest, Sar and Orgrim had a love-hate relationship with their brethren who foolishly ran off to drink the demon's blood. If these guys could be saved, the tribe would immediately gain a strong army once the poison of the demon's blood was removed. That was over 100,000 strong young men. It was almost more than the total beastmen population of the tribe. Unfortunately, these crazy brethren were not easy to catch. The blood of the Lord of the Abyss was many times stronger than chicken blood. After drinking it, their speed would not increase by much, but their strength would definitely double, and their vitality would increase. At least on the battlefield, these crazy guys could not stop until their heads were cut off. When attacking Hellfire Citadel, Sar had asked his men to wear heavy armor and try to use blunt weapons to knock out these fell beast men. The results were terrible. Often, before the other side was knocked out, the new tribe's soldiers were knocked out first. The timid tribe's soldiers were easily killed by the other side's heavy weapons. In front of big wooden sticks that weighed dozens of kilograms, or the bones of giant beasts that were used as hammers, no heavy armor could stop them. They would still be shaken to death. The most effective way to deal with the fell beast men was with the Alliance's heavy cannons. A single cannonball could easily knock out a bunch of fell beast men. Of course, only the ones who were knocked out at the outermost had the chance to be captured and escape, becoming a member of the new tribe. But now, Duque had used this strange method to send a large number of beastman captives to the tribe. In Sar's eyes, every battered and exhausted fell beastman was a treasure more valuable than gold. As expected, Duque's eyes are on the entire world. Orgrim sighed. Thinking of Duque's bold words about killing the Burning Legion, Sar could not help but feel the difference between him and Duque. Alright, let's attack. Wait. Seeing that Sar was about to give the order to attack, Orgrim pulled Sar back. Duque's message hasn't come yet. But, it looks like there's no danger, right? Wrong. Duque is such a person. Whoever crosses the line will have to bear the consequences. Don't go out until we hear from him. Almost as soon as Orgrim's voice trailed off, a strange rustling sound came from the west. Ancestor. What's that? Looking at the colorful ghostly things that flew into the sky like countless kites, Sal opened his mouth full of fangs. A large group of snakes flew into the sky. However, these snakes all had wings. It looked like the evil god Hacker. Yes, it was a flying snake. On the flying ship, the hoof cried out in surprise, "What's that?" Duque narrowed his eyes. He was also very surprised. He did not expect Naga to have such a thing. That's right, the Naga's exclusive unit, the Flying Snake, had never appeared in World of Warcraft and only existed in the battles of Warcraft. These annoying light air units were not large in size, but they were abnormally agile. Although the Alliance's Griffin Knights and Hippogriphon Knights were larger in size, the Alliance's main air force was unable to deal with these enemies that were too fast to hit. Bulang frowned when he saw the Alliance's Griffins approaching. Order the Griffin Legion to retreat and prepare the Type 3 grenades. Bulang ordered. When Bulang's aide-de-camp wanted to carry out the order, Duque stopped him. Don't use the Type 3 grenades. Go straight to the Bane the Father formation. Duque suddenly said. Although they were surprised that Mark Dooku, a mage who had no military rank, was standing beside Brian, no one had expected that Mark Dooku would overstep his authority and change Brian's orders in such a condescending tone. The aide-de-camp puffed up his cheeks and was about to scold Mark when he heard his boss say, "Do as he says." The Alliance had been fighting all over the world for 23 years. In the last 8 years, after Duque took over, he trained a group of well-disciplined troops with modern military rules. They were known as the Iron Army. Duque's order was quickly carried out. In the sky, the Alliance's flying battleships formed a relatively dense trapezoid formation in the unstable airflow. It was like the audience seats in a stadium. The height of the first row was the lowest, while the height of the second row was higher, and so on. This time, it wasn't just the battleships. Even the transport ships were lined up. 56 spaceships formed a slope-like formation. That's right. Due to the purpose and weight distribution of the transport ships, there weren't many heavy cannons installed. There was only a row of 102 mm cannons on the top deck. But that didn't mean that they couldn't deal with fast, small, but huge enemies. The answer was the strange thing that was revealed when the hatch was opened. What's this? It looks interesting. Hoof asked, wagging its tail. Before Duque put on the Hoof's earplugs, he laughed and said, "You can call it Bang Bang Cannon, 40 mm octuple Bang Bang Cannon. The Alliance's latest and most powerful short-range air defense weapon." Of course, this thing couldn't compare to the original version of the World War II warship on Earth. This inferior version of the 8-barreled Bang Bang cannon was more like an amalgamation of 8 large revolvers with the barrels of the guns fitted together. However, the trigger required a dwarf with earplugs. He had to use his hands to shake the gear that was the size of a wooden barrel lid. He had to continuously pull the trigger to fire the large ammunition that was dropped into the 40mm barrel from the chain above. These shells were as thick as 2 fingers, and each had more than 30 sharp nails that were as long as a finger. With the help of the black gunpowder, they could fly 500 meters away, forming a death barrage with a diameter of more than 2 meters that could tear through any light armor. Think about it. Not to mention the battleships, just the transport ships had 24 octuple bang-bang cannons on one side, and the cruisers had more than 50 of them. When more than 50 spaceships formed a large formation and a total of 1,000 anti-aircraft cannons fired at the same time, the scene was too beautiful. Sal and the other orcs below were dumbfounded. In less than 3 or 4 breaths, there were continuous explosions on the side of the entire fleet, like the long dragon roar of the guardian dragon. Accompanied by the roar of the anti-aircraft cannons, countless fine objects that flickered with a metallic luster formed a heavy rain that was denser than the flying snakes. It poured into the flying snakes like overflowing water. This time, these mysterious creatures that had never appeared in the eyes of mortals had been hit by bad luck before they could make a name for themselves. Faced with the countless steel nails flying at them, the flying snakes had their wings pierced in an instant, or their bodies that were covered with scales that weren't too hard. They fell from the sky almost soundlessly, scattering a dirty rain of blood. Not to mention the enemy, even Bulang, the commander, was dumbfounded. No wonder you insisted on building a Cleveland-class air defense ship. Nonsense. The Cleveland-class was called the godfather of the world. Was it just an undeserved reputation? It's just that I changed the 40mm Bofors to bang-bang cannon. Chapter 14:12. In the sky, countless pieces of flesh and blood rained down. On the ground, the enraged fell beast men were still venting their anger in the mud and ropes. However, anyone with a bit of insight would know that Illidan's side was bound to lose. When the flying snake card was eliminated, all of the Naga tribe's rescue efforts were destined to be futile. On top of a huge stone mushroom a few kilometers away, no one noticed that Vasht was actually watching the battle with the Alliance's standard binoculars. The uppermost pair of arms put down the binoculars, and Vasht's mouth curled into a mocking smile. Let's go. Those brainless fellows are finished. Wait. The one who spoke up was a night elf with a black robe on his lower body and a naked upper body, revealing his magic rune tattoos. His eyes were covered with a black cloth. What? Vasht's slightly furrowed brows showed her displeasure. Vasht, how dare you abandon Master's army like this? The night elf sternly rebuked Vasht. Pay attention to your identity. Leotheras. A male Naga holding a huge golden-red war hammer immediately stepped forward and stood between the night elf and his master, Vasht. It's you Nagas who need to pay attention to your identity. You are Master's servants, yet you casually abandon more than 100,000 people because of your cowardice. The night elf did not budge an inch. Unexpectedly, the mocking smile on Vasht's lips became even more pronounced. Are you talking about the 100,000 idiots who only know how to eat everything that can be eaten and can't do anything else? Are they idiots with muscles for brains? Enough. Blind man. The one who needs to pay attention to your identity is you. You are now a direct subordinate of Lady Vasht. Before Illidan's new orders come, even if Lady Vasht wants to execute you, you shouldn't have any complaints. The male Naga's hammer landed on the top of the mushroom, causing the mushroom umbrella that was hard enough to build a house to crack. The blind man was naturally Leotheras. As a moon guard who had once been incomparably glorious in ancient times, and also as a betrayer of the night elves, under Illidan's guidance, he also gave up his pair of eyes in exchange for the power of demons and became a demon hunter. Of course, this was also proof that he was Illidan's staunchest supporter. Karathres, you. Leotheras was at a loss for words. The Deepwater Lord Karathres wanted to say something but was stopped by Vasht. Of course, My subordinates and I are willing to fight for Master Illidan, but the premise is that we have a new way to deal with those flying things. Regrettably, it seems that with my meager intelligence, this is all I can do. Unnecessary resistance will only increase the number of casualties. The ones who will die are also the servants of the Master. Am I right? Vasht's words carried a frivolous tone that made Leothera's angry. Vasht's words infuriated the demon hunter. If he had enough strength, he almost wanted to teach Vasht and that damned Deepwater Lord a lesson. Unfortunately, Vasht's strength was undoubtedly the strongest among Illidan's subordinates. Vasht smiled. If Master Illidan was here, he would have given more wise instructions. Unfortunately, he's not here. As the Commander-in-Chief, I'm exercising the authority that Master Illidan gave me before he left. Is that wrong? Loyal and devoted Mr. Leotheras. The demon hunter's entire body trembled, but he could not blame Vasht any further. Illidan's territory in the Outland was huge. Naturally, he needed many subordinates to help him control his territory. Firstly, Vasht did not leave her own battlefield. Secondly, she did not raise the flag of rebellion. She only abandoned some fell orcs that were not under her control. There was really no way to blame her for this. Even if she wanted to rebel, what could he do? Let's go. Vasht took the lead and led the Deepwater Lord to the edge of the huge mushroom umbrella while swaying her snake tail. A powerful spring of water suddenly gushed up under the guidance of Vasht's power, forming an elevator that was over 100 meters tall. It slowly brought her and Karathres down, leaving the blind Leotheras behind. Leotheras stomped his feet and finally did a high-altitude dive. He gracefully crashed into the deep waters beside the stone mushroom and swam towards the serpent shrine in the middle of Zangarmarsh's serpent shrine lake. On the other side, on the Black Pearl, the many detectors placed everywhere sent back images of Vasht's departure. Duque secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Vasht has left, Duque said. Oh, I thought you were going to use the last things on the transport ship. Bulang laughed. If we used them, our allies would be crying. Hee, I don't mind using them. Duque and Bulang were talking in riddles, leaving Iril full of question marks. The last things were asphalt. The Iron Stove Fort's refinement of crude oil was not perfect. The ratio of diesel extraction was not high, but as the easiest byproduct to extract from crude oil, there was a lot of asphalt. The sticky stuff like asphalt was good for paving roads. Currently, the road from the Dark Portal to Honor Fort was paved with asphalt, other than the railroad tracks that the Alliance had to lay during the war. However, it was not a carriage, but a wagon pulled by the Kiraj Zerg. After all, demons could easily destroy the railroad tracks, but the road was not so easy. On a good road, the Kiraj Zerg could easily pull a 1-ton carriage on it. This was a useful supplement for the Alliance and the Horde supply line. Of course, if the asphalt was poured on the fell orcs, there would be no chance of survival. Although asphalt was extremely sticky, it was still a product of petroleum. It could catch fire at 500 or 600 degrees. Now that the Alliance had thrown incendiary bombs and bombs in 3 directions of the fell orc army, if they were to throw asphalt on top, it would be another feast of barbecuing orcs. During the First and Second Dark Portal Wars, it was definitely something to be happy about. Now that there was no need to do this, Thrall would almost fall out with them. Fortunately, Vasht chose to abandon her stupid teammate. At this time, the Horde elites hiding in the distance in the east were already impatient. Fortunately, they finally received a message from Duque. In the magic transmission mirror, Thrall saw Duque's face in Karazhan. Vasht has left, the Horde can go. Phew, Thrall took a long breath. Thank you, Duque. The Horde owes the Alliance a big favor. No need to thank me. I hope to see these transformed Horde warriors on the front line against the Burning Legion. Duque smiled and nodded. Yes, do you need a small favor from the Alliance? Thrall originally wanted to say no, but he immediately changed his mind. Thank you. Thus, the Horde army saw the Alliance's flying battleships begin to drop sand on the fell orcs struggling in the mud and the messy steel cables. Thrall immediately understood. This was a place for the Horde warriors to stay. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that today was destined to be a feast for the Horde. Chapter 14:13. Sal called out, and the tribal warriors, who had been waiting impatiently, rushed forward. At this moment, the Alliance's cruisers and destroyers in the sky suddenly flashed with countless complicated and delicate magic arrays. After a while, the ice arrows of Blizzard fell in front of the tribe's advance route. A magic storm that was only used for support was generated out of thin air and easily extinguished the flames that were blocking the tribe's advance. Sal bared his teeth. He really didn't know when the tribe would be able to use air-ground integration and infantry cannon synergy as smoothly as the Alliance. There was no other way. The Alliance had already given them face by not being beaten after falling behind. The rusty water conglomerate that relied on the tribe was not a charity hall that provided everything to the tribe for free. With the rusty water conglomerate's bloodline, they wanted to develop flying warships, change infantry's light weapons, and create a cannon revolution. This was absolutely unrealistic. Sal was also afraid that Gast would be too powerful and let the cunning goblin trade prince run away. Then the tribe would suffer even more losses. Well, the tribe could only be obedient infantry now. At most, they would have some magic support. The high-tech war could only be handed over to the Alliance. No matter what, the Alliance was now kind. Those who were rolling around in the mud and the tangled ropes were living treasures. How to catch them? The Alliance's lasso for the tribe was a great artifact. The wolf riders of the tribe used nets to catch enemies that could not fly high, but it was not so troublesome to deal with these ridiculous opponents. Each of them was like a western cowboy on earth. They directly lassoed them and pulled them out under the pull of the wolves. Regardless of whether they struggled or not, once they were lassoed, an evil orc was like a prelude to being torn apart by 5 horses. They were pulled out in a strange posture. Anyway, the evil orcs had thicker skin and flesh. Even if they were strangled by the neck for a long time, they would not necessarily die. Every time they successfully pulled out an unlucky person, a group of ill-intentioned infantry would use sticks as thick as thighs to educate these crazy compatriots, physics. The evil orcs who were beaten up and even had a few teeth smashed were dragged to the back and handed over to the orc laborers to tie them up with special ropes given by the Alliance. One by one, they were tied up like rice dumplings and thrown into the open space. That wasn't an ordinary hemp rope, considering how powerful the evil beast men were. Those ropes were all mixed with steel wires. Coupled with the special steel handcuffs, unless one was as strong as the Tauren and was tied up badly, they would not be able to escape. The fell orcs on the periphery of the quagmire were quickly dealt with. The orc laborers eagerly ran up and threw thick logs onto the swamp, using them as stepping stones for the wolf riders. The war wolf cheerfully and nimbly jumped on the wooden steps, and continued to drag out the evil beast men from the depths of the swamp and knock them unconscious. Sar and Orgrim looked at this ridiculous scene of a few thousand people dealing with over 100,000 people. Both of them had strange expressions on their faces. How terrifying. Duque had actually calculated that the lake that had just been filled would turn back into a swamp if it was not watered by the heavy rain. He can even summon such a large-scale rain with the power of a mortal, and that kind of anti-air cannon. Sal sighed. He's still a demigod, Orgrim reminded in a low, muffled voice. At this moment, a messenger came to inform Thrall. The Alliance has sent someone over. Who? A person who claims to be Mark Dooku, with a small team of dwarven secret chamber guards and a Draenei woman. The dwarven secret chamber guards were known for their bravery and loyalty. They had always been directly under the bronze-bearded dwarven royal family, so this messenger could not be a fake. But why did they send a Divinity? Orgrim's eyebrows were almost furrowed. To be honest, more than 20 years ago, Orgrim had participated in the war between the Beastmen and the Divinity. Even last year, he had heard of the Divinity clashing with other normal Beastmen clans. Orgrim was very unhappy that the Divinity had latched onto the extremely thick thigh that was the Alliance. The Alliance and Shotrath City exchanged glances, and the messengers of both sides frequently discussed the details of joining the Alliance. The Horde also knew about it, and it was basically just waiting for the final announcement. Just like how the Alliance had tacitly allowed the Forsaken and Goblins to join the Horde had no right to criticize the Alliance on this matter. Sar nodded. Then, among a group of giants that were easily 2.5 meters tall, a group of guys with an average height of less than 1.6 meters walked in. Mark, I'm afraid, in the countless rumors of the Divinity, the Horde's beastmen were the most terrifying, the most vicious. The rumors of the beastmen eating humans had never stopped. In fact, this was a misunderstanding. Although the beastmen had evolved sharp fangs in the past tens of thousands of years in order to bite down on strong and muscular prey, that was only for low-level prey. The beastmen did not eat humans. Just like the Tauren and the Ox, they were not the same race. But on the battlefield, the incomparably violent fell beastmen, after losing their weapons, would often pounce forward, use their fists to smash, use their claws to dig, and even use their mouths full of fangs to bite off the throats of the Divinity. This had left a serious psychological shadow on the beastmen for the Divinity. Even if Duque had repeatedly emphasized that these were the new Horde, the new beastmen, without the aftereffects of the Devil's blood, Imriel was still afraid. Even if there was a team of dwarven secret chamber guards wearing over 100 pounds of heavy armor, unfortunately, they were too short, and still exposed her to the sight of those green giants wearing black iron heavy armor and muscular. The feeling of being looked down upon by an old enemy was terrible. Her hooves could not help but grab tightly onto the sleeves of this Lord Mark Dooku. Oh, no, from the back, she was practically sticking to him. Ugh, although it felt good to be pressed against by the Divinity maiden's breasts, Duque tried to calm himself down. Wait. Those are hooves. The blue-skinned, reversed hooves of the Divinity. Could it be that I can also react to such a fellow? No, I am not filthy Dooku. I am a new era of integrity, a gentleman with morals, oh, a demigod. However, Duque was someone who was used to grand occasions. When he saw Thrall and Orgrim, Duke pinched Hoof's arm lightly and made her let go of him. Ah! Imriel let go as if she had been electrocuted, but she was still very close to Duque. It could not be helped, Thrall's personal guards, who were more than 2.5 meters tall, gave her too much pressure. Duque controlled this Mark Dooku to smile. Good morning, beloved Great Chief. I am Mark Dooku, and I bring greetings from the Alliance's commander, Lord Duke Marcus. Good morning, Great Mage Mark, please send my regards to your commander. I also know that the Great Chief is very busy, so I would like to ask on behalf of the Alliance, if the Great Chief is interested in experimenting with a new method to cure the Devil's blood addiction. Thrall and Orgrim's ears instantly perked up. Chapter 14:14. At first, Sal was puzzled by Mark's arrival. The Alliance had sent a Radiant Moon Great Wizard to discuss such an important matter with him, a tribal chief, in an equal tone. Was it appropriate? Not appropriate. In a sense, this was already a humiliation to the tribe. But after the two sentences, Sal turned his head slightly and exchanged a look with Orgrim. They saw the shock in each other's eyes, and immediately nodded at the same time. Although it was only two sentences, but the tone, rhythm, and manner of speaking made the first thought in their minds, could this guy be Duque himself? In this world, the one who understood a person the most was often his enemy. Orgrim had dealt with Duque for more than 20 years, and Sal had also known Duque for 8 years. How could they not be familiar with Duque's characteristics? There was no lack of people in this world who bravely looked at the two tribal chiefs while surrounded by a group of fierce and strong beast men. Those guys were often the most resolute paladins in the alliance, such as the Silver Five Saints. However, he spoke in a relaxed and carefree manner, always speaking in a tone that made it seem like he had the entire tribe under his thumb, and yet the tribe had no choice but to submit to him. There was only one such person in the entire world. Even if their appearance was different, the vaguely familiar outline of the face still made Sal shiver. "You are Duque." Sal was interrupted before he could finish his question. "I am Sir Marcus's plenipotentiary representative." Duque was resolute. That would be strange. Sal was indeed smart, but the problem was that beast men had no talent for acting. Both he and Orgrim had one sentence written all over their faces: "You must be Duke Marcus's son." That's right. It was already more than 20 years ago that they first knew about Duque. If that dissolute fellow didn't have an illegitimate child, then even the beast men wouldn't believe it. "You are my illegitimate child, right? Kultiras? Looks like the right age." Oh, could it be that Gianna secretly gave birth to him when she was in Marcus's house? Our great Horde spies investigated Theramore and found out about Jaina's background. All right. One was alive, the other was dead. The two great chieftains looked at Mark Dooku as if they were looking at an illegitimate child. This made Duque extremely embarrassed. "Are you treating every person with the surname Dooku as the exclusive surname of an illegitimate child? It's not like I'm Snow from Game of Thrones." "Ha ha ha. You've gone too far this time, haven't you?" A certain bad maid named Vanessa, who was bringing food into Karazhan Duque's room, laughed so hard that tears came out of her eyes. She slammed the table with all her might. Duque's main body also looked like he had eaten a fly. "Damn it, I can't leave Azeroth, so I'm forced to play with a smurf. Do you think Sar is my son? F***ck. After that, Bayou, my child was still growing in the Windrunner sisters' bellies. Alright, this time even jumping into a river wouldn't be enough to clear his name. Unfortunately, Duque could not refute that. The veins on Duque's forehead were about to explode as he patiently asked the two great chieftains, "The tribe can't handle so many demonized tribesmen, right?" Since it was related to his fellow tribesmen, Sar immediately put away his gossipy soul and became serious. "This is indeed a serious problem. Does the Alliance have any good suggestions?" The captured fell orcs were indeed taken to the rear and taken good care of. But that was only when there were few captives. The holy light of the priests and the nature magic of the shamans could indeed speed up the removal of the demonic blood in the fell orcs' bodies, but the healers of the Alliance and the tribe could not handle more than 100,000 fell orcs. It would take too long to remove the effects of the demonic blood. Sar's childhood imprisonment and life as a slave had made him very clear how terrifying the side effects of the demonic blood were. Even a strong-willed tribal hero like Grom would wake up from nightmares at night and roar like a beast. If he did not kill, he would have to suppress the urge to destroy and kill in a self-torturing way every time. More than a decade ago in Lordaeron, almost every orc prison had to be made with iron bars as thick as the mouth of a bowl and hard bricks used to build the walls. That was because in every cell, just seeing the orcs in a berserk state, scratches that were more than 2 centimeters deep on the walls were enough to make a normal person tremble in fear. Moreover, to house more than 100,000 fell orcs. Just the thought of the manpower and resources needed was enough to make Sar break down. Before the fell orcs were completely transformed back into normal orcs, they were a classic burden. But Sar could not give up on his own people. Now that Mark Dooku had jumped out, it really solved the urgent problem of the entire tribe. At this time, Duque smiled and pulled out Imriel, who was hiding behind him. Hoof refused this somewhat inexplicable action. She held on to Mr. Mark's back tightly, refusing to be pushed to the front. Unfortunately, this seemingly weak human mage actually had arm strength that was completely above her. Hence, Hoof's face turned pale, and she was pushed to the front as if she was about to die for a righteous cause. Looking at her horrified face, Sal could only smile wryly as if the words "Don't eat me" were written on her forehead. "Great Chief, now the Alliance solemnly recommends to you, holy water from Shotrath City." Holy water? Sar and Orgrim were stunned. That's right, holy water. The holy light of the Alliance's paladin is the most effective way to deal with the demons. Since the fell orcs mutated because they drank the demon blood of the Lord of the Abyss, then holy water is the most effective antidote. Using light to fight against darkness was a very reliable choice. But that was awkward. Back then, the orcs almost killed the Drenii to extinction. Who would have thought that the tables would turn, and this time it was the Drenii who had to rely on them. This feeling of swallowing a fly alive was so uncomfortable. Won't Stratholme's holy water work? Orgrim suggested an alternative as if to change the topic. The essence of the holy light is a pure, kind spiritual energy. As a derivative of its divine will, Stratholme's holy water will naturally dissipate. The further away from the holy city, the longer it is stored, the less effective it will be. Moreover, the production of Stratholme's holy water is far from enough to supply more than 100,000 fell orcs. Duque's unspoken words were, "Your tribe should accept their fate. Giving up what's close at hand to seek what's far away won't end well for you." Orgrim's chest felt as if it was blocked by something, and it was very uncomfortable. At this time, Duque added another weight to the tribe's scale of weighing gains and losses. The Alliance has done some tests. If a fell orc can get a sufficient amount of holy water of moderate concentration, and if they eat a good diet, they will generally return to being a normal orc within 1 to 3 months. They will also be able to get rid of their addiction to demonic blood. Coincidentally, Shotrath City now has the purest holy light creature in the entire universe, Naru. Chapter 14-15. Duque spread his hands and put all the pressure on Sal. Whether it was a terrifying burden for 10 years, or a group of loyal and powerful new blood to replenish the tribe's losses in a few short months, anyone with a brain would know which to choose. "I've given you a clear path, whether you take it or not is up to you." Sal was very smart, and he immediately understood the hidden meaning in Mark's words. "What price does the tribe have to pay?" Duque smiled. "The Drenii have been hunted down by the Burning Legion for the past 25,000 years. They have seen the most inhumane genocide, and encountered the most shameless betrayal. The old tribe is not the first to raise the butcher's knife against the Drenii, and it is likely that they will not be the last. Of course, the most basic attitude is still necessary. The leader of the Drenii, Waylan, only has one request." "Speak." Sal stared at Duque with bright eyes. "His request is that you take no less than 5,000 subordinates outside Shotrath City, and admit in front of the Drenii, that the tribe's attack and massacre of the Drenii under the bewitchment of Kill Jaden was a mistake." As soon as this request came out, not just Sal, but even the guards around him were in a low uproar. "Humph. How dare the Alliance? Just because of those blue-skinned people who are eyeing our land." The beastman's low voice was no different from thunder. At this moment, somewhat surprisingly, Iril stood up. "Humph. Is this the magnanimity of the beastmen? You don't even have the courage to admit that you were bewitched by the demon commander Kill Jaden? Since this war itself was a mistake, then as long as you admit your mistake, we Drenii are willing to fight alongside you against the Burning Legion." She was clearly a delicate woman. She was clearly extremely afraid. The beast men around her could tear her to pieces with just a finger. Iril still chose to use the identity of a Drenii, and spoke in a voice that belonged to the Drenii. Thrall and Orgrim were visibly moved. The guards were silent. Orgrim pressed on Thrall's shoulder and stepped forward. I am the second great chieftain of the Horde. Back then, I also participated in the attack on Shotrath City. I killed 38 Divinity guards and became the first great chief Blackhand's adjutant. Let me go. Imriel was suddenly subdued by Orgrim's aura. At the end of the day, she was just a fledgling apprentice of the Karabayr shrine. Lacking political wisdom and experience, she did not understand the difference between an apology from a former chief and a current chief. She instinctively felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't tell what it was. Orgrim's actions were very noble. From another perspective, in Draenor, the Divinity were the invaders. If there were no conflicts between the Divinity and the Beast Men clans, there would be no grievances. In fact, Zul, who was bewitched by Kill Jaden, threw out the oracle of, the Divinity will be the destroyer of the orcs, but it was just the fuse. Right now, the new tribe was in dire need of population, especially the orcs who were the core of the tribe. If they couldn't save their compatriots, it would greatly affect Thrall's prestige. On the other hand, the orcs had never forgotten their hatred. Among the orcs, there were also young and hardliners who advocated killing humans, destroying the Alliance, and robbing everything in the Alliance. At the moment when the orcs were suffering, this argument was actually quite popular, but it had been suppressed by Thrall. If Thrall apologized as a great chief, it would certainly be more harmonious with the Alliance in terms of diplomacy. Internally, doing so would undoubtedly offend the hardliners. Orgrim's move could not be said to be unsophisticated, and it was also a rather compromising approach. But, Thrall shook his head, his rough face showing a resolute expression. Thank you, Orgrim. But I am an orc. While I am indebted to the glory of my ancestors, I must also bear the mistakes of my ancestors. I have always thought that the battle for survival between the Divinity and the orcs was not wrong. The only mistake was the addition of the devil element. Since it was a mistake, then as the great chief, I have the obligation to correct it. And for the sake of less suffering for my compatriots, what is this stain on my name? Speaking up to this point, Thrall said to Duque, Mr. Mark, please pass on my message to Commander Duke Marcus. After settling down my more than 100,000 compatriots, I will go to Shotrath City. Sal's words caused his personal guards to feel deep veneration. For a moment, they all pounded their left chests with their right fists. The dull thumping sound was the highest respect they had for the chief from the bottom of their hearts. Duque controlled Mark to bow deeply, and at the same time, pressed down on his hoof, who didn't know what to do, and made her bow as well. I praise your courage and wisdom. Thank you very much, Hoof hurriedly said. Thrall looked at Duque, as if he could see through this shell and see Duque in Karazhan beyond the endless time. Then I will have to trouble the Alliance to spend more effort and allocate the supplies needed by the 100,000 fell orc captives as soon as possible. In order to save their compatriots, the orcs will not be stingy with their possessions. As you wish, I will pass on your message to Commander Marcus. As he left the tribe, his hoof actually became soft. Scared me to death. Orcs are really scary. Duque held onto his hoof that was staggering as he walked, and laughed. Seeing how brave you are, you seem to have the potential to become a heroine. Heroine? Me? Forget it, I am just a Karabo apprentice. Imriel seemed to be in the back, and kept patting his chest. Duque smiled and encouraged Hoof. In the face of danger, many people will choose to be cowards for life, rather than heroes for a second. Yes, Prophet Willan does want the tribe to apologize, but I have never heard of any holy water supply. Ah. That is just a small matter. After handing over the cleanup to Bulang, Duque brought Hoof back to Shotrath City. After listening to the report, Willan first thanked Duque. Thank you very much for everything the Alliance has done for the Divinity. In this way, although the deceased compatriots cannot return, they can at least rest in peace. Willen's tone changed, and he looked troubled. However, speaking of holy water, even Naru cannot produce an unlimited amount of holy water for 100,000 people, right? Obviously, Willen was a little troubled, because Duque did not communicate with him before agreeing to give the tribe the holy water that the 100,000 orcs needed. Where did the Drinii get so much holy water? Duque rolled his eyes. Please, the fell orcs are almost half demons. Instead of drinking high-purity holy water, it is better to let our Thean give them a Ashbringer? Just dilute it. Dilute? Chapter 14:16. It had to be said that the Drinii, who believed in the holy light, were simple. They knew nothing about economics or forgery. Do you mind if I splash a bucket of water on the Naru? It was a strange request, but the Naru agreed. Duque splashed a bucket of water on the Naru. The holy light creature, which was floating in the air and formed from many physical fragments of spiritual power, suddenly became a drowned rat. Without the permission of the Naru, the surrounding Drinii guards would go crazy if Duque did this. Because in front of the holy Naru, any blasphemy was not allowed. Unfortunately, firstly, Duque had the permission of the Naru, and secondly, they wanted to see how the diluted holy water that Duque mentioned would be diluted. The Naru was drenched in water. Imriel, catch it with a bucket. Okay. Imriel eagerly went to catch the holy water. The Drinii looked at Imriel, who was full of admiration, and used an empty bucket to catch the golden water droplets that flowed down the Naru's body. Imriel only took a small bucket, and Duque said, "That's enough." Huh? That's enough? Imriel was surprised. Was it enough? Every Drinii had their own doubts. Who knew, when everyone saw Duque put a small spoon into the bucket, and thought that Duque was going to confirm the concentration, Duque said, "Come, pour this spoon into the reservoir outside the hall. After diluting, it will be the holy water that the beast men need." Pfft! The Drinii all spat. How big was the reservoir outside? To a certain transmigrator standard, it was bigger than a standard swimming pool of 50 meters by 25 meters. The Drinii used it to collect rainwater from the rain and filter it for the citizens to drink. Hey! Wouldn't the beast men complain if it was diluted like this? Duque said with pity, "Those fell orcs have too much demonic blood in their bodies. Suddenly giving them high-purity holy water is tantamount to feeding them poison. This diluted holy water is just right." Duque's words made sense, and the Drinii all nodded, praising the alliance for being so thoughtful. If it weren't for Duque's secret instructions in Karazhan, even Jaina and Vanessa would have treated him as a saint. It doesn't matter even if it's diluted to 1,000th. It's fine as long as it can heal faster than the beast men. Listen up, we can fake the content by 1%, but the packaging can't be weak. Didn't Kul Tiras sell hundreds of thousands of fist-sized glass bottles last time? Just use that thing to pretend. Then, he would harshly extort money from the tribe. I'll leave the details to you. Jaina giggled. What if Sal objects? Dumoke said righteously, "Do you have an opinion? He's trying to save his people. What if there really is?" Duze thought of a very famous advertising slogan before he transmigrated and decisively changed it. Then tell him that we don't sell holy water, we are just porters of holy light. Wow, what a high-end and classy line. The Alliance and the Horde worked hand in hand. This time, they might have to squeeze out all the Horde's minds. What Duque was doing now was not only cooperation, but he also did not forget to complete the Alliance's industrial revolution. Technological and industrial progress required primitive accumulation. After all, the Alliance and the Horde did not share the same wallet, so of course they had to keep accounts. Where did the armor come from? Where did the steel for the cannons come from? Where did the steel for the tanks come from? They were all fucking mines. The Alliance controlled almost all of the mines in Azeroth, so could the Horde still walk the same path as the Alliance? Of course not. This was Duque walking the Alliance's path, leaving the Horde with no way out. If Sal had been in power for a longer time in this life, and the Alliance and the Horde had a harmonious relationship, Duque did not mind giving the Horde a piece of the soup, or even a small piece of meat. What if it was like in his previous life? In any case, Sal was about to step into Nagrand. It seemed that he would soon complete the profession change from a simple warrior to an elemental shaman. It all depended on whether his brain had been damaged by the shaman's path of nature. Time, January 24th, the Horde's stronghold on the Hellfire Peninsula, Salma, had to change its purpose as soon as it was built. In the end, the 120,000 fell orcs turned Salma into a huge refugee camp. Because they had to spend a lot of manpower and resources to take care of these crazy compatriots, the Horde's front lines almost came to a standstill. At this time, the main force of the Alliance, led by Varian, had to resist the counterattack from the Moon Shadow Valley at the Windrunner stronghold in the southeast of Taraka Forest. There was still no news of Illidan. However, a huge object that should have only appeared at the gate of the Black Temple appeared at the border between Moon Shadow Valley and Taraka Forest, the Doom Walker. This thing was also a product of black technology. In appearance, it was similar to the Fell Reaver in the Hellfire Peninsula. But this boss Reaver, which was the product of Eridar's black technology, was much more powerful. It was not that the Alliance did not work hard, but Egi had a Gundam. That was what he was talking about. With a height of more than 10 stories, the mechanical giant that looked like it used steam but was actually powered by dark energy, could cause an earthquake with just a raise of its hand or a kick. It had a huge force that could be calculated in tons, and if it were to hit any Alliance or Horde hero, the effect would be F*King crushing. A slightly weaker warrior profession would be insta-killed if it went up. Not to mention the armor that was made of an unknown alloy. At one point, the Alliance sent the Black Pearl over, but even with the Black Pearl's largest cannon, a single blast merely left a shallow white mark on its breastplate. Only the highest level epic weapon at the current stage, or the attack of a Radiant Moon Mage or above, could hurt this thing. No one knew who was controlling it, but anyway, the Doom Walker was 100 times more cunning than the original history. It did not attack the Windrunner stronghold, but rampaged in the southeast of Taraka Forest, desperately destroying the Alliance's supply troops. It kicked a tank or a dozen transport insects. William was so angry that he was going crazy. At the same time, Vashj did something that made the Alliance's balls ache. She found a secret passage from Zangarmarsh to Taraka Forest. Duque did not know what secret passage it was. Perhaps it was a waterway that already existed, or an underground river or something. Anyway, from late December to early January, a total of 20 days, the Alliance's supply was suddenly interrupted by the Naga troops 11 times. Because the Alliance was now integrating air and land transportation, even the transport teams had flying ships patrolling and protecting them. They moved during the day and stopped at night, so in reality, the loss of human lives was not big. Most of the ones that died were the transport insects. However, delaying the supply was a victory. Shotrath City had tens of thousands of mouths, and the roads were not smooth. Just the consumption of supplies alone was an astronomical figure. No. We must get rid of Vashj first. Chapter 14-17. Duque had no choice but to do this. Originally, the most efficient way of transportation was by air transport ships, which could transport hundreds to thousands of tons of supplies at once. The problem was that the skies of the Outland were simply monstrous. On January 2nd, a sudden elemental storm directly caused for transport ships to fall from a height of 500 meters, smashing into pieces. The 4 ships, including soldiers and civilians, lost a total of more than 1,200 people. On January 5th, it happened again. This time, it was two flying destroyers that suffered. They were blown horizontally for nearly 1,000 meters, and finally crashed into each other, both of them crashing into each other. As a last resort, Duque ordered the flying fleet to lower their cruising altitude. However, this attracted the harassment of the outland birds. When land transportation became important, the Nagas came to cause trouble again. Duque had to discuss with the leaders of the alliance to deal with Vasht first. In the command post of the Windrunner fortress, the leaders of the alliance used a video conference method similar to Duque's before he transmigrated. First, Wuxia reported the alliance's losses and resource consumption in the Outland War. We have transported 32,000 tons of various supplies through the Dark Portal every month. Due to the transportation conditions, 30% of them are invested in Salma to support the newly captured Fel Orcs. 45% are held back in Fort Glory due to transportation. Before Fort Glory, the loss ratio was 5%. After leaving Fort Glory, this number immediately jumped to 26%. It was not a heavy loss, but the severe supply problem meant that the Alliance could not further increase their troops, at least not far away from the Hellfire Peninsula. Vasht controlled Zangermarsh, tightly choking the throat of the Alliance. Then it was Brian who announced the failure of filling the Serpent Lake in frustration. Obviously, the water is Vasht's domain. No matter how many airships we send or how many tons of sand we throw in, she will roll up a whirlpool and discharge the sand from a certain place. Maybe it smashed into our ships, or maybe it was thrown to the edge of the westernmost road. Anyway, after 2 weeks of work, the water lines of the Snake Lake have not changed at all. And the diesel of our flying ships is starting to run out. Duque could not do anything about diesel. After killing Ragnaro's doppelganger, the Alliance found the largest oil field in the southern continent. They were the Burning Plains and the Scorching Canyon. Without the interference of the fire elementals, under the defense of the Iron Furnace Castle dwarves, the Scorching Canyon was the first to build a large number of oil wells. Crude oil less than 50 meters below the surface was easy to extract. However, due to technical issues, they could only produce 5,000 barrels of crude oil per day. Similarly, because of the poor refining technology, the success rate of the diesel was even worse. Unfortunately, the air pressure in the outer realm was low, and the steam engine was not very useful. As a result, every time the air fleet launched a large-scale attack, they would have to accumulate several days' worth of diesel. Boulang was helpless against William's repeated requests to clear a way out. This kind of bitterness was hard to describe with words. At this moment, William said, "I suggest that the Alliance organize a team of heroes to break into the Serpent Temple." I knew that this could very well be a trap set by the Burning Legion. I couldn't even rule out the possibility that Kil'jaeden's true body had arrived. But we only have two choices left. One is to take the risk and attack to get rid of the nail that is Vasht, the second is to retreat, close the door of darkness, and directly endure until the entire outland is completely destroyed. The conference room fell silent. The current situation was very different from the first generation of the Dark Portal. At that time, the Alliance still had kings who could not fight at all, such as Old Man Tarinas. The big shots of the Alliance at this point in time were basically the group of people who could fight the best in the entire Alliance. If it was in Azeroth, there was still the planet's protection array and Elun to help watch over it. Here, a demon commander of Kil'jaeden's level could really descend at will. Putting all the strong people on the line meant putting in all the kings. Once they were all wiped out, the Alliance would collapse. It was funny to say that they would retreat. Although there were only 7 or 8 large areas left on Draenor's planet, and the edges were collapsing every day. The strange energy field was still wrapped around this huge continent, and it was floating in the void. Only God knew how long it would take for it to be completely destroyed. Maybe it would be a year, maybe it would be 100 years. Who dared to say that the Door of Darkness was the only spatial flaw in Azeroth? Who dared to say that they could definitely defend the door of darkness for that long? Unknowingly, all eyes fell on Duque's face. Duque did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked Valen, "Can you contact Kale, that's?" "It's very difficult," Valen answered directly. "It's difficult, but it's possible." "That's right. Draenor is a world that is being destroyed. Although I respect the Draeniai's attachment to Shotrath City, for the future of the Draenei, and to reduce the supply pressure on the Alliance's frontline, I hope that Sir Valen can arrange for no less than 30,000 Draenei to migrate to Azeroth. If possible, it's best to use your starships." Valen's eyes widened slightly. "Thank you very much for the Alliance's acceptance. I wonder where the Alliance is going to arrange for my people?" The breathing of the Alliance's bigwigs became slightly faster. After all, the Alliance was a group of kingdoms. If the Draenei were placed in a kingdom, it might affect the development of their own kingdom. Even if it was not within the current borders, they did not want a group of refugees to occupy the expansion space of their own kingdom. The Lordaeron continent obviously could not. Even in the eastern part of the hinterlands, which had not yet been colonized, the Wildhammer dwarves also hoped to bring the entire hinterlands into the territory of the Eagle Nest Mountain Kingdom after killing the forest trolls there. The southern continent could not do it either. With the development of industry and the demand for minerals and oil, the territory of the Bronzebeard dwarves was far larger than it had been in history. Now the barren lands had a railway from Loch Moden directly to the Scorching Canyon. These two places were already under the actual control of the Bronzebeard dwarves. When the opportunity came, they would announce this to the Alliance. After Ragnaros left, Stormwind also expanded north from the Reedridge Mountains, bringing the Burning Steppes into their territory. In the southernmost Stranglethorn Vale, after all the trolls in Zul Gurub were dead, Stormwind would divide Stranglethorn Vale equally with Kurtiras. In fact, this was because Varian wanted to repay Kurtiras for helping the people of Stormwind to evacuate during the first battle of the Dark Portal, so that the Stormwind Kingdom would not be destroyed. Otherwise, why would he give away the meat in his mouth? So when Valen asked this question, most of the kings of the Alliance were a little nervous. Duque smiled and raised his hand to display a large 3D map of the world of Azeroth. When Duque's finger moved to the Kalimdor continent, the kings secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The place to settle the Draenei is here. Duque pointed to a medium-sized island southwest of Darnassus. Chapter 14:18. Blue Mystic Island. A place far away from the mainland, but not isolated from the Alliance. The big shots of the Alliance took a look and immediately realized that the location of this place was very good. The Draenei had been persecuted and hunted down, so they would more or less feel insecure. A place that was not directly connected to the tribe's borders would increase their sense of security. But they were not drifting away from the Alliance's control. This was because Darnassus was less than 100 kilometers northeast of Blue Mystic Island. The entire sea was under the protection of the Elves' Black Sea Coast Fleet. Although the Kalimdor continent was to the east, the Black Sea Coast and Grey Valley were the Elves' territory. By placing the Draenei here, they would be able to support the Night Elves. If the Alliance and the tribe fell out in the future, the Night Elves would not have to face the entire tribe alone in Kalimdor. Everyone saw Tyron's calm face and immediately knew that Duque had already obtained the permission of the Night Elves and Elun. Everyone said the same thing in their hearts, a choice that kills 3 birds with 1 stone. A choice filled with political foresight. Valen bowed deeply. On behalf of my people, I would like to express my deepest gratitude once again. The Draenei did not reject immigrants. 25,000 years of exile had long been imprinted in the deepest part of every Draenei's soul. To be able to have a safe place to live and reproduce was the greatest kindness. Sending away 30,000 refugees would undoubtedly make the front lines more plentiful. Next, it was naturally the crucial part. William, your proposal to gather all our forces is very courageous and charismatic. This was a compliment from an elder. William nodded. Thank you. Combat power is a must. So, William, I hope that you can gather the existing hero-level powerhouses in the Outland, including the powerhouses of the tribe, together with the most elite flying fleet and landing troops, and defend here for 3 days. Duque waved his hand, and the map had already switched to the Outland. The location of his finger was right in the middle of Zangermarsh. Ruins of the Twin Towers? The ruins of the Twin Towers were located to the south of the Serpent Lake, right beside the lake. To be honest, this was definitely the hinterland of Vasht's territory. It was easier said than done to go deep into the enemy's territory and defend under their eyes for 3 days. Because it was right beside the lake, Vasht could fully unleash her power in water battles. I really can't take it anymore. Big waves sweep over at the slightest provocation. If he was pulled into the lake by something like an octopus tentacle, he would be able to reincarnate and prepare for the next round of his life. What kind of support can we get? William asked cautiously. Let's wait until the tribe arrives. Duque revealed a mysterious smile. That afternoon, the leaders of the Alliance and the Horde held a conference. After Duque made this suggestion, Sal agreed without hesitation. Sal was a rational leader. Putting aside the interests of the race, he was also a person who valued friendship. Now, the hundreds of thousands of evil beast men in Salma were relying on the Alliance's supplies, and their situation was improving. Although drinking the highly diluted holy water made many evil beast men vomit and have diarrhea, the intermittent drinking of the diluted holy water and having enough food to replenish their bodies made the evil beastmen's demonic addiction better. What was rare was that the Alliance didn't lie to the tribes. If it was in the past, under the pressure of food, he might have used some old rations to make up the numbers. Now, the Alliance used this year's brand new autumn rations and a large amount of frozen pork as supplies. It was very heartwarming. On the other hand, in Orgrimmar, Varrock Salyafar and Grom heard that hundreds of thousands of their compatriots were in urgent need of food supplements and diluted holy water to detoxify. They launched a large-scale operation to support their compatriots. The Alliance's resources weren't free. All the supplies had to be paid by the tribes with ores and other resources. New rations and old rations were not the same price. The Alliance clearly marked the price in this regard, and they were fair to both the old and the young. Moreover, Duque waved his hand and even excluded the losses along the way, and charged them according to the current standard. In this regard, the Horde had nothing to say. Therefore, Varrock and the other tribes that stayed behind launched a campaign to let their compatriots eat better. As long as they had food, it was fine. They took the initiative to propose that the Alliance's disaster relief supplies be replaced with old rations. One had to know that old rations were the Alliance's war rations. According to the technology of this era, if it was left in the barn for more than 5 years, it would definitely go moldy. Usually, when the Alliance's food was about to rot, they would throw it to the pigs. Therefore, the price of old rations was only 1/10 of the new rations. In the magic message, when Sal saw his compatriots in Azeroth gnawing on black old rations and black bread, coupled with the few prey in Duroder and the barren lands as meat to fill their stomachs, a big man like Sal cried out. In this regard, Duque was also speechless for a long time. But the Alliance had been through a series of wars, and food had begun to run short. They really couldn't come up with so much new rations to help the Horde. Moreover, the previous insect disaster had almost wiped out the wild creatures of most of the Kalimdor continent. Sigh. Even so, Sal still owed the Alliance a favor. With the addition of the Horde's powerhouses, this time the Battle of the Twin Tower ruins could gather about 20 heroes. More than enough to defend, but not enough to attack. For Duque, this was enough. On the 20th of January, year 24 of the Dark Portal, the movements of the Alliance army alarmed the entire Serpent Temple. What? The Alliance dares to build a base in front of our house? After hearing the news, Vashti didn't know whether to be angry or to laugh. When she brought half of her body out of the Serpent Lake with her men, she was stunned by the scene in front of her. The way the Alliance built a base was simply unheard of. First, the mages used a magic fog to cover their vision, and then a group of dwarven engineers secretly descended, using bulldozers to forcefully flatten the entire area around the Twin Tower ruins. Then, as 12 giant transport ships swayed and landed under the cover of other flying ships, a large number of Horde infantry, Alliance gunners, and archers rushed out of the transport ships and set up a battle formation. Then, 6 smaller auras showed their true colors as earth-drilling bugs, digging holes in the designated places. Entering here, exiting there. Once they finished digging, they immediately scrammed. A large number of dwarven craftsmen were in place, and then the other 12 transport ships actually hoisted a huge sentry tower that was more than 15 meters tall, inserting the sharp foundation into the hole that the smaller auras had just dug. These sentry towers were all built in Fort Glory. They were reinforced concrete, and any one of them weighed more than 100 tons. Unreasonably, the dwarves directly used Deity's Descent to catch the sentry tower. Even if it was the Leaning Tower of Pisa, they would still hold it straight, using manpower to correct the deviation and finally pouring in cement. After pouring in the cement, Pharaoh ran over on the spot and directly used frost magic to cool it down. When the 12 sentry towers were set up, less than half an hour had passed. At this time, Vashti had just come out of the Serpent Temple. Chapter 14:19. Vashti, who knew nothing about modern industry, was dumbfounded when she saw this scene. It was clear that if the Allied forces were not stopped, they would be able to build a decent small fortress in a day at most. However, the surprise was short-lived. Master. The Deepwater Lord Carithres asked Vashti in a low voice. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter? Vashti smiled seductively. What's the point of catching these mortals? Can they pose a real threat to the Serpent Shrine Temple? Or do you want to see me kill these lowly ants with my demigod body? Of course not. Your Majesty. Carithres bowed his head deeply. One of her slender arms was gently raised, forming a graceful arc. Vashti made her decision. Once 5 or more heroic domain powerhouses appear, drown it. As you wish. The Alliance engineers were also trembling with fear. Hey, do you think those 6-armed long-tails will come out in full force? Don't worry, Sir Marcus said they won't come out. Oh. What the engineers were doing was very much like stacking blocks. Pieces of 2-meter square prefabricated steel plates were connected with screws, placed in predetermined positions, and then poured cement into them like sandwiched biscuits. A fortress covering an area of about 1 square kilometer rose from the ground almost at a speed visible to the naked eye. For a whole day, not a single Naga floated to the surface to openly peep at the fortress. Perhaps there were, but it was impossible to detect them from under the water. The Allied Army's security force rotated every hour as usual. Just that every hour, the tower behind them would rise by 1 floor. There were 12 arrow towers in the outer layer. When the reinforced concrete wall connecting these arrow towers was completed, 12 taller arrow towers immediately appeared in the gap between the arrow towers. After the completion of the 24 arrow towers, a second layer of walls was immediately built in the inner circle, and 6 mysterious magic towers were erected inside. Layer after layer, as if skewered, the prefabricated parts were inlaid. With each additional layer, the dazzling colorful patterns on the magic towers became brighter. Until the 10th floor. Of course, this wasn't a mage tower in the traditional sense where mages could live, conduct experiments, and defend against enemies. It was a mage tower that could be used for both offense and defense. This was a pure magic power amplifier. It used high-purity magic crystals in conjunction with a huge magic formation to upgrade every single spell cast by Pharaoh, who was in charge of the Magus Tower, from personal spells to war spells. There were many times when Merogur Tidewalker wanted to charge forward, but Karithres held him back. There's no hurry. There was no hurry. Now, this group of worthless soldiers couldn't even be considered as appetizers. We must be patient. Almost at the same time, in the Telrador fortress in the central part of Zangarmarsh, the powerhouses of the Alliance and the Horde had already gathered. This stronghold, which originally belonged to the Drenii, had now become the Allied army's forward base because of someone's order to fill up the lake. The fortress was situated at the top of an incomparably huge stone mushroom. It looked so tall that it was unreachable. The mushroom's roots, which had been reinforced by dozens of defensive spells, were even more indestructible. If an existence below the level of a true god were to come over, they could forget about shaking it in the slightest. In the hall where the powerhouses of the Horde rested, Sal was calmly cleaning his famous hammer of destruction. He used forceps produced by the Alliance to carefully clean the minced meat stuck to the side of the square-shaped hammer. Although the high temperature of the hammer would turn everything into charcoal, biological fats were hard to burn. Over time, there would always be some jelly left behind. "Are you ready?" Orgrim came in and asked. "I'm always ready," Sal replied calmly. Surprisingly, they didn't talk about this mission. Obviously, the Alliance and the Horde's positions were always different, but they chose to believe in Duque without reservation. As a leader, he would never be stingy to predict his enemies and his allies for the worst. Because a leader would never represent a single person, but a large group. Only in this way, those who trusted him and gave their lives and souls to him would not die in vain because of the leader's wrong trust. A mature leader should never trust any outsiders. After all, when you trust your allies more than you trust yourself, then you can talk about having absolute trust in your allies. This wasn't an easy thing to do. Whether it was Sal or Orgrim, they all believed in Duque. They believed that he had an absolute trump card that could deal with Vashj. Sal's adjutant came. "Great Chief, the Alliance's Storm King Varian is waiting for you outside." "I'll be right there." Sal strode out with the powerhouses of the Horde and saw each other in military attire. Everyone's face was filled with determination. Every pair of eyes was filled with absolute confidence. This was the determination that only those who had gone through thousands of hardships and been baptized by more than one cruel battle would have. Varian's hands were on the hilts of his two divine longswords, and his eyes were like lightning. "It's time." Sal nodded. "Let's go." With the strongest mage of the Horde, Anastrian, in the lead, the Pharaoh of the Alliance and the Horde cast a spell together and opened a portal that could allow 4 carriages to pass through side by side. On the other side of the portal was the brand new small fortress built on the ruins of the Twin Towers. As soon as the Sun King arrived at the fortress, he immediately flashed to the Mage Tower in the south of the central square of the fortress. One could see that with the fortress as the center, a huge flame shield with a diameter of more than 2 kilometers quickly formed. The huge fortress looked like a huge fireball from afar. Surrounded by a group of powerhouses of the Alliance, the great astromancer Solarian hugged the air. The pair of delicate and soft palms were facing a large crystal awl that was at least 3 stories tall. The purple awl emitted surging arcane energy waves that caught everyone's attention. Whoosh, 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 circle after circle, it surged outwards like a tide. Arriving at the center of the square, Solarian's every step agitated the magic array that had been engraved on the ground, causing an even greater arcane reaction. When Solarian let go of her hands and let the 10-meter-long awl slowly fall into the center of the magic array, a zigzagging bolt of lightning suddenly appeared in the purple-black sky above the ruins of the Twin Towers. An immeasurable amount of elements gathered here at high speed, causing the thin clouds to suddenly become visible to the naked eye. The clouds boiled like thick porridge. When the boiling reached its peak in just a few seconds, a purple-blue light spot suddenly appeared in the sky directly above the top of the crystal all. As if an entire mountain had fallen into the water, the arcane energy from the light spot set off waves of energy in the air, spreading out for several miles. Chapter 14:20. What is that? The Deepwater Lord Carathres, who was quietly monitoring the ruins of the Twin Tower Fortress a kilometer away, let out a scream. There was no existence around him that could answer his question. All the powerhouses of the Serpent Shrine Cavern were dumbfounded as they stared at the fortress helplessly. Boom! As if there was an earthquake, the entire fortress trembled. Carathres, who floated to the surface of the water at high speed, looked at the surrounding lake in bewilderment. There was no accident. In his field of vision, a conspicuous ripple was quickly forming a huge wave, spreading from the direction of the ruins of the Twin Tower Fortress towards the entire Serpent Lake. That was definitely not a wave caused by the wind. What are those guys doing? Do they want to shake the entire continent even further? No one could answer him. In the entire Serpent Shrine Cavern, apart from his queen and that blind man, no leader had a higher IQ than an ordinary human. The Deepwater Lord was a little frightened. If he was not mistaken, Delano had become like this because Jaden had sent a human bomb to Duque. In the end, Duque had rejected it and sent it to the dark portal and blown it up, turning the huge planet into a few connected pieces that were suspended in the void in a crooked manner. Carathres really hoped that the knowledge of the earthquake just now was his illusion, but very soon, he sadly found another example, the swamp. The entire Zangermarsh, which used to be bustling and always had murderous intents even when it was quiet, was now quiet. Then, a buzzing sound came from the southern shore, as well as the deeper waters of the Serpent Lake. Perhaps it was the bottom of the water? He could not be sure. At this moment, the second wave of tremors came as expected. The cause of the tremors this time was even clearer. Fire, frost, arcane, nature, shadow, holy, 6 different elements were mixed in the shockwave that rushed out of the ruins of the Twin Tower Fortress. Every wave, every inch of ripple, had a high concentration of elements. For many unranked mages, these waves could be considered some kind of low-level magic. The elemental waves brought up by the shock wave rushed out from the entire southern part of the Serpent Lake in 3 directions, north, northwest, and northeast. The momentum of the surging waves did not subside. Carathres estimated that this wave could very likely swing more than 1,000 meters, and even hit the Colaifong Reservoir buildings 3,000 meters behind him. In the middle of the venomous Snake Lake, there was a 5-pointed star that looked like a starfish from a bird's-eye view. That was the Colaifong Reservoir. Vashj followed Illidan's orders and built many water pumps in Zangermarsh. The water extracted by all the water pumps was transported to the Colaifong Reservoir. The purpose was to pump all the water up to carry out a mysterious mission. No. Don't even think about getting in the way of the Lord's great cause. Carathres rushed to the surface of the water and roared. He waved the giant hammer in his hand and a arrow of disaster hit the towering waves in front of him. The powerful shadow force violently shattered the waves, but even more elemental waves came from other directions. No, Carathres was horrified to find that in the face of this level of elemental wave, he could only protect himself. He couldn't help but yell, then turned around and looked at the horizon. Dozens of seconds later, the towering elemental wave was like a bulldozer's shovel, slamming into the Colaifong Reservoir's water pump. Standing in the middle of the venomous Snake Lake, the dark yellow water pump that was 5 stories high was like a willow branch in the wind. It could only shake wildly, and in less than 3 to 5 seconds, it completely fell apart with a bang, turning into a pile of rubble with magic runes and starting to sink. No! It's the Serpent Shrine Temple down there. Karethres was about to go crazy. In fact, it wasn't just the Kolifong Reservoir's water pump that was affected. The elemental wave triggered by the ruins of the Twin Towers formed a tsunami-like existence. Stone mushrooms that were more than 10 stories high were collapsing and collapsing. The waterways that originally divided the land of the swamp were filled with water, overflowing the low slopes. But following the thunderous tremors, Naga, who was hiding at the bottom of the water not far away, felt that the underwater world she was familiar with had changed. The water was no longer just water. It was a terrifying existence filled with destructive elemental energy. The small fishes and shrimps in the venomous Snake Lake, as long as they were within the range of the elemental wave, all died instantly. But the various water elemental creatures were greatly strengthened. Including the unstable Hydus, all the water elemental creatures of the Serpent Shrine Temple had become one size larger. This should have been a good thing. If the bosses of the Serpent Shrine Temple knew that this was the inadvertent leakage of elemental magic when the newly built magic net called in magic, then probably no one would be in a good mood. At this moment, only the truly strong could sense that the elemental laws of most of the venomous Snake Lake were deviating. They were fearfully leaving the control of the few natural laws of the outer realm, turning to yield to the mysterious power that was descending. No group of wandering elements could resist that unparalleled mysterious power. The existence that appeared to be from Shotrath City, but was actually from the distant Azeroth planet, Karazhan, announced with an incomparably domineering appearance that he was dominating everything around him and taking over almost all the elements nearby. At the gate of the Serpent Shrine Temple, any existence that wanted to come here would first be besieged and blocked by countless underwater creatures. But now, there were two huge humanoid existences that suddenly appeared at the gate. Who? The Naga guards, who had been extremely vigilant, shouted angrily. What responded to them was a flash of lightning, a humanoid existence that emitted all kinds of light. Heroic spirits, or elemental guardians would be more appropriate to describe them. By forcibly connecting to the Serpent Shrine Temple with the magic net, Duque was able to directly join his direct subordinates. The heroic spirits that relied on him in Karazhan, after injecting a large amount of elemental energy into their souls, reappeared in this world as elemental guardians. Kill. Destroy evil. There were not many of them, only about 100 people, but with the momentum of a tsunami, they directly drowned the Naga guards blocking the way. Whether it was the burly male Naga waving large long-handled weapons, or the Naga mages using all kinds of strange magic, no one was a match for them. At this time, a dark swamp giant blocked in front of the intruders. It was a 2-story tall, dark green humanoid creature with 3 fingers and disgusting pustules all over its body. Its poison, its natural magic, was simply a nightmare for ordinary creatures. Unfortunately, for pure elemental creatures, its skills were all useless. Chapter 14:21. The elemental guardians advanced like a hurricane. At this moment, the temple gate, which had been silent for a while, suddenly flashed with a brighter and more resplendent light. Countless elemental light balls jumped out from the translucent illusory ends of the weave and then gathered together. First, a huge elemental heart appeared out of thin air under the protection of magic runes that were flying back and forth. Thump. Thump. Accompanied by a strong pulse, the energy materialized with fire elements as the dominant energy, constructing the thick arteries and veins of the heart, as well as other internal organs. Then, illusory dark brown bones appeared, and rows of ribs protected the newly emerged internal organs well. The next step was the limbs that still retained the characteristics of insects, then came the tendons and muscles. Layers of what looked like biological substances, but were actually elemental muscles covered the bones composed of high-density elements, giving the body the ability to move. Finally came the skin and bright red armor. Everything seemed to be the perfect interpretation of 3D printing technology. Not only was it done perfectly, but it was also done extremely quickly. In just 2 seconds, 2 3-story tall, seemingly thin giants appeared. Ha ha. I didn't expect us brothers to regain our bodies so soon. Although it's temporary, it's still great. Right. The ones who appeared here were Duke's number 1 and number 2 thugs, the Karaji twin emperors. Insignificant Naga Vaskia who overestimates her capabilities, are you ready to face the wrath of our lord, Duke Marcus? A thunderous voice reverberated over the entire Serpent Temple. At this moment, the roaring roar had turned into a violent tremor that affected the entire space. One must know that the bottom of the entire Serpent Temple was basically water, and only a large pile of wooden and metal buildings on the surface of the water could allow terrestrial creatures to pass through. If they fell into the water, they would attract countless piranhas at any time and devour the unlucky ones who fell into the water. But now, the declaration of the twin emperors directly caused the entire space to shake. It was not just the water beneath the temple. Every building, every pillar, and even every plank of wood seemed to be emitting a deep and ancient sound. They hummed again and again, turning into a unified sound, responding to the declaration of the two emperors. The water at the bottom of the serpent shrine was surging, because the deeper water was also rumbling and shaking, because countless Karaji worms were rushing out of the illusory weave. As soon as they came out, the elements materialized and became strange existences that seemed like real life. They responded to the emperor's call and performed a shocking feat: throw, whip, break, flow. Before I transmigrated, during the Taiyuan era of Emperor Xiaowu of the Eastern Jin dynasty, Fu Jian of the former Qin dynasty unified the north and decided to mobilize 1 million troops to destroy the Eastern Jin dynasty and unify the whole of China. At that time, the emperor's most arrogant words were, "Now I have nearly 1 million troops. Just throwing the horsewhip into the Yangtze River is enough to cut off the river flow. Why should I be afraid of natural hazards?" The current scene was actually not inferior to the legendary, cutting off the flow with a whip. The insects the size of small tanks madly rushed into the water, one after another, like martyrs committing mass suicide. If it was a normal creature, at the moment of death, perhaps it would hesitate. But they were not. Not to mention that they were already materialized elemental creatures. Even when they were alive, the spiritual connection between the insects and their nature of absolute obedience would drive them to complete their master's orders without hesitation, even if they were told to die. So what if they were attacked and bitten by the piranhas? So what if they felt suffocated and uncomfortable? They almost madly rushed into the water, paddling and rushing with their chelicerae that were not adapted to underwater movement. Even if they could not sink, it did not matter. More of their insect brethren would press down on them from above. If anyone could overlook the entire serpent shrine at this moment, they would find that there was a large mass of inkblack spreading in the water at the entrance of the shrine. That was the Karaji insect people carrying out the task of cutting off the flow with a whip. With their enormous bodies in absolute numbers, they easily filled up the body of water in front of the twin emperors that was tens of meters deep, more than 20 meters wide, and more than 300 meters long, forming an insect dam that was hard for bystanders to imagine. Let's go. My elder brother. Let's go. My younger brother. The two familiar faces under the visors seemed to be smiling. The twin emperors' thin and huge bodies took giant strides, as if they were mirror images of each other. One took a step with his left leg, the other with his right leg, and they walked together onto the black carpet that only belonged to the Karaji emperor. Instead of stepping directly on the insects, the two of them stepped on the elements floating in the void. To put it bluntly, the insect bridge was not a necessity from the beginning to the end. Perhaps, this was what it meant to be pretentious. Duque, who was far away in Karazhan, bared his teeth and complained, "Damn, my subordinates actually think that I can pretend?" Beside him, there was the light laughter of several women that sounded like silver bells. The aura of the twin emperors did not matter. Anyway, the strong men under them, no matter how good they could fight, only carried the name of their boss. For the next scene, Duke's mood was very calm. Countless Naga took their weapons and swayed their long snake tails, attempting to surround and attack the twin emperors. At this moment, two majestic, terrible, and ancient auras rose from the twin emperors. The Nagas' expressions changed drastically, and they raised their weapons to resist these two auras, but two invisible forces suddenly swept across the entire space, forcibly suppressing all the Naga. This was no longer a matter of being unable to move an inch. This was simply a mandatory law. Without the permission of the twin emperors, let alone raising a sword or a gun, they could not even twitch a muscle. The Nagas' bodies were stiff, and they sank to the bottom of the water in this ridiculous way. Why was it ridiculous? Because they were not even allowed to breathe with their cheeks. This scene, let alone the Naga themselves, even any of the leaders in the Serpent Shrine could not believe it. Unable to breathe. Unable to resist. The difference in rank was like the difference between heaven and earth, and even looking up was not enough to see the difference, let alone overturn it. At this moment, a cold aura spread from the depths of the Serpent Shrine. Soon, the cold turned into blazing heat. The entire eastern part of the shrine lit up with the flash of thunder, forming a distinct echo with the elemental brilliance of the twin emperors at the main entrance to the west. An elegant female voice sounded, "Oh hee. My shrine has never had any decent guests, and I didn't expect two demigods to come. Duke Marcus really thinks highly of me." Chapter 1422. Following Vashti's voice, the Nagas who had been suppressed by the twin emperors immediately felt as if they had been granted amnesty. Their forcibly stopped breathing resumed, and their forbidden heartbeats also resumed. Every Naga greedily took a deep breath, letting the cold lake water pass through their cheeks so that oxygen could re-enter their blood vessels. At this time, Karithres's magic voice also sounded in Vashti's ears, "Your Majesty, I, Karithres, will immediately return to escort you. No need, all of you attack the Alliance's fortress in the ruins of the Twin Towers." "Your Majesty," but, Vashti was obviously sullen, "Idiot. Haven't you discovered the key to the enemy yet? The enemy can descend two powerful demigods, the key is that magic prism. Mobilize all combat power, destroy it." This anger was not only directed at Karithres, but also at herself. Before this, she really could not imagine that relying on the incomparably huge magic transmission and the souls of two genuine demigods, it was actually possible to project demigod-level combat power across the stars. The most disgusting thing was that unless she had the special skill to annihilate souls, as long as Duke's magic did not run out, even if her strength was above the other party, she could only desperately deal with the twin emperors' fierce attacks over and over again. Moreover, was her strength really stronger than the twin emperors? Unknowingly, a bean-sized drop of sweat dripped down from Vashti's temple. Of course, the most important thing in a battle between peerless experts was momentum. Whoever showed fear first, then there was no need to fight, they could just directly surrender. Vashti's faint laughter once again echoed in the sky above the Serpent Shrine Temple. "There's no fun in slaughtering the weak. Come, experts from Azeroth, I, Queen Vashti, am waiting for you here on the throne." The twin emperors laughed, "Lead the way." Even if the emperors had bowed their noble knees to Duke, the pride and reserve in their hearts had never been reduced in the slightest. Of course, they could slaughter all the Nagas who approached them, but if it was not necessary, it was a kind of helplessness and humiliation to have their hands stained with the blood of the weak. The metal platform in front of them made an ear-piercing sound, and the metal pillars that were supposed to be permanent buildings began to change shape and move under Vashti's mysterious power, turning into bridge piers. The crooked platform straightened at this moment, turning into a smooth path that led straight to the Queen's Hall. The twin emperors leaned back, and a large bug appeared out of thin air behind each of them. The thrones fixed on the bugs' backs caught them perfectly. The insect mount moved its scythe-like long black legs and quickly ran towards Vasht's throne. Vasht's throne was located in the easternmost hall of the Divine Temple, sitting on a high platform built of 27 steps. The entire platform was surrounded by a circle of green water. If a mortal came here, they would first have to face the endless stream of water elementals, nagas, swamp striders and other powerful aquatic creatures in the green water. Only then would they be able to step onto the terrifying platform. Today, the throne was quiet. There was only a pool of green water that was level with the throne's platform. Even the platform was submerged in water. If a human stood on a high platform, they would have to face knee-deep water. The twin emperors came down from the beetle. The depth of the water was barely above their ankles. Welcome to the Serpent Shrine Temple, the Karaji twin emperors Vek Lor and Vek Linalas. A subtle smile appeared on Vasht's face, and at the same time, she spread out her 6 seemingly petite arms. We have brought the ultimatum of our lord, Duke Marcus. Surrender or perish. The twin emperors echoed each other. The Naga Queen's 3 opponents showed different situations. The opponent at the bottom had his hands on his hips, and the one in the middle was holding the elbows of the opponent above. Vasht's long hair had turned into a terrifying living snake twisting its body left and right, spitting out its tongue continuously. Vasht's exquisite face revealed a playful smile. Violent fellows. Are you really the subordinates of Duke Marcus who did not hesitate to let go of his great enemy, the Horde, and prioritized fighting against the Burning Legion? If the Insect Emperor's political wisdom is only at this level, I will be very disappointed. The twin emperors were a little confused. After all, the Karaji insect people generally used a more direct way of thinking. The nature of obeying the strong was branded in the depths of their souls. Thus, even the twin emperors could not understand Vasht's deeper meaning. Vasht continued to speak to herself, women are never creatures who like to be at a disadvantage. Ayaya. You still need to train your thoughts on women. The twin emperors were not annoyed. Send whoever is suitable to do what. This is a compulsory lesson for those in power. If we try our best and still fail, it proves that the enemy is beyond our master's imagination, or that our master has made a wrong choice. From beginning to end, there is only one thing we have to do, that is to deal with you. Vasht's lips curved into a playful smile. If I meet you in other places, I probably won't be able to do anything about it. But here, in this world full of water, you little frogs who haven't even removed your tails clean want to deal with me, a snake woman. Isn't that too arrogant? After saying that, Vasht's 6 arms popped out a burst of brilliance at the same time, and in the blink of an eye, her 6 arms were full of weapons. The top pair of arms each held a magic wand. A longbow engraved with countless complex magic patterns appeared in the middle hand on her left. The bottom pair of arms took out a pair of daggers with a typical night elf style. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was almost armed to the teeth. With a flash, Vasht, who should have been on the weaker side, took the initiative to attack. Asterisk swoosh swoosh swoosh. Whoosh. Asterisk there were clearly 7 arrows in a row, but the first 3 arrows were fierce and incomparably violent, and the intense lightning dazzled the twin emperors so much that they could not open their eyes. However, it was the last 4 arrows that truly caused them to lose their lives. Each arrow was like a shadow brought out by the first 3 arrows, silently making a strange arc and sinking into the water in front of Vasht, not even stirring up a splash. In the end, they shot out of the water behind Emperor Vek Lor in an incomparably abrupt manner, fiercely shooting towards Emperor Vek Lor's waist. Everything was perfect, but unfortunately, she had chosen the wrong target for her sneak attack. As the Demon Emperor, Vek Lor was immune to physical attacks. Asterisk clang 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 clang. Asterisk tisk. Even if it was not a direct feedback, Vasht had already realized that he actually had the trait of physical immunity. This discovery made Vashti rather unhappy. As she launched her attack on the Demon Emperor, the Twin Emperor's counterattack came as expected. The Demon Emperor's gift was a shadow arrow, so thick that it could be used as the mast of a cruiser. The Sword Emperor's counterattack was a fierce forward slash, and with a forceful stomp of his left foot, his huge body had already crossed a distance of 50 meters. Vec-Lor waved the huge Kyra Emperor sword, and with incredible agility, launched a triple slash. Chapter 1423. Cha-cha-cha. The three swords formed a Z shape in the air. In the end, the Sword Emperor's three swords had no special technique to speak of. It was like a slash from any skilled swordsman. If there was anything special about it, it was fast. Too fast for the eyes to follow. Insanely fast. It was completely unexpected that such a huge body had agility that surpassed most hero-level thieves. If one could not dodge in time, then Vashti would likely turn into snake pieces on the spot and be used to make snake soup. If it was a demigod, they would have already been hit. It must be known that if the Twin Emperors abandoned their integrity and focused on fighting 2 against 1, it would be very shameless. One was immune to magic, the other was immune to physical, and they could both use Heal Brothers. Regardless of whether they could defeat them or not, just resisting them was already very difficult. Because in a small area, the two brothers could completely cover for each other and use their own characteristics to forcefully take the opponent's moves. It was like a magic attack, and the Sword Emperor took it head-on. What would you do? Although their lives were connected, you had to first attack with the right posture, method. This required their enemy to be more versatile. It just so happened that Vashti was such a demigod who practiced both magic and martial arts. In the face of 3 consecutive slashes, Wuxia did not even think. She twisted her true water snake waist. Her arms were either raised or retracted, turning her body and limbs into a beautiful S shape. The Karaji Emperor sword flashed in front of her and beside her with a cold glint. The timing was so ingenious that it did not seem like a life-and-death battle, but more like a master and disciple feeding each other moves. The moment she avoided the great sword, Vashti's counterattack came. The gorgeous longbow was raised almost at 0 distance. The middle right hand pulled the string and 3 arrows were about to be shot. Under normal circumstances, Vecnalas should have pressed forward and attacked before Vashti pulled the bow. Unfortunately, Vashti did not only have a pair of hands. The arm holding the dagger threw the thief skill, fan of knives, at Vecnalas. Not 2. Instead, it was dozens of epic daggers that formed a perfect arc in the air. They pierced through the air like the howl of death as they pierced toward Vecnas. Even if it was an AoE attack, the attack power would not be too high. All Vashti wanted was a split second of separation. Vecnalas couldn't hide even if he wanted to. After all, how could it be that easy to dodge a demigod powerhouse's attack? The Sword Emperor frowned and could only take a step back to avoid the fan of sabers, allowing the terrifying power of the blades to pass right in front of him. The moment he stopped, Vashti had already finished drawing her bow. 3 sharp arrows were shot out from a place not much further than 0 distance. The Sword Emperor was indeed the Sword Emperor. The Kila Emperor sword slanted, and the 2 lightning bolts were knocked away. Because the Sword Emperor was immune to magic, the lightning was unable to harm the Sword Emperor at all. He tilted his head and dodged the 3rd arrow. The Sword Emperor had thought that this was the full extent of the attack, but that was not the case. Before he realized it, the Demon King Vec-Lor had already unknowingly appeared behind him. Vashti, the Sword Emperor, and the Demon Emperor happened to form a line. The lightning bolts that should have been shot away actually drew a small arc in the air and shot towards the Demon Emperor's face. This time, the Twin Emperors were finally shocked. They completely did not expect that the arrows that seemed to be shot away could still attack a second time, especially when the lightning contained in the arrows completely surpassed the Demon Emperor's natural resistance. If this kind of demigod-level attack really hit, the Demon Emperor would definitely be heavily injured. Vec-Lore had no choice but to stop his next magic attack and use his staff to summon an even more powerful magic shield to block in front of his face. But, Vashch's continuous attack was not over yet. No one noticed that her long snake tail had actually grown longer without a sound. Just as the Demon Emperor blocked that arrow, the snake tail was like a noose, accurately and ruthlessly wrapping around the Demon Emperor's right foot. With a twist of the snake's waist, the Demon Emperor's huge body flew out and was forcibly smashed into the deep pool beside the throne. It was true that Vec-Lore was immune to physical attacks, and this kind of attack would not hurt him, but this did not mean that he would not be sent flying. It was only at this moment that Vashch's opponent's wand-wielding arm released a powerful magic, defeating the Shadow Arrow that had been released by the Demon Emperor but had lost its master's control. Vashch had won the first round. In Karazhan, the women around Duque gasped when they saw this scene. Vashch. So strong. Jaina's face was ashen, but she had to admit this fact. If she and Vashch were to fight one-on-one, she probably would not even be able to last half a round. This was not just a difference in rank, but also a difference in combat experience and fighting style. Vashch had not yet released any big moves, and just by relying on the perfect magic and martial attack combination, she had beaten the demigod duo of the twin emperors into quite a bit of a disadvantage. Duque smiled bitterly. This multi-attack thing is really a talent. If multicast could be barely achieved with hard work, then multi-attack, which could face multiple opponents of the same level without fear, was really impossible to train. Duque suddenly felt a little fervent in his heart. If Vashch is really Selena and is willing to follow me, and I can deal with Jaina, then isn't that, now, Duque did not have too much time to let his imagination run wild. After all, he and Selena were not like Tyrant who had hooked up long ago. Even if they were fated, it was an ill-fated relationship from 10,000 years ago. Before continuing this relationship, it was better to do things according to the standards of both sides. In the magic mirror, the second round had already begun. The Demon Emperor, who had been thrown far away, was just about to climb out of the water when he encountered a few unexpected small troubles. Originally, Vashch would summon a few swamp striders on the throne platform. These things had bodies that looked extremely like jellyfish, with flying saucer-shaped bodies and long legs like long tentacles. Unexpectedly, because no one attacked the other few core areas of the Coliphong Reservoir, Vashch caught the leaders of the few core areas of the reservoir as able-bodied men. The Black Strider was a leader of the Striders with strange abilities. It used its superpower to directly lift the Demon Emperor Vec-Lore who had jumped out of the water. This levitation was very similar to the priest's levitation, but it had characteristics that transcended magic. Vec-Lore could cast spells and attack, but he could not control his body to float high off the ground, to a height of more than 200 meters, and almost hit the ceiling of the Serpent Shrine cavern. Chapter 1424. The lightning arrows of the Black Strider and the various spells of the Nephilim Emperor clashed in the air like a fireworks battle. Neither side caused any damage to the other, but bought time for Vashch. On the other side, Vashch was actually suppressing the Sword Emperor. It had to be said that having more arms was a bunker. As soon as she saw the Demon Emperor being forced away, Vashch quickly replaced the weapons in her arms with two longswords, and directly pressed forward to force the Sword Emperor into close combat. If it was an ordinary battle, the Sword Emperor dared to say that he wouldn't lose to any opponent of the same level. The point was that Vashch's multiple attacks were too disgusting. 6 arms and a long tail that appeared and disappeared mysteriously was fine, but even her hair was an incomparably sharp weapon. 70 or 80 snake hairs meant 70 or 80 deadly venomous snakes. If it was just a simple venomous snake, the Sword Emperor wouldn't be afraid at all, because he was no longer an ordinary creature, but an elemental creature through and through. As it happened, these venomous snakes had been adjusted by Vashj. Even if it was a legendary hero-level warrior, if his equipment wasn't up to standard, he would probably fall on the spot. There were so many venomous snakes, and each of them simply arched their body before suddenly shooting out to bite the Sword Emperor. Because the movements of the snakes were really too fast, they actually created a shadow similar to a machine gun firing. What kind of fighting style was this? The Sword Emperor used a great sword, and couldn't display this kind of fast and fierce attack at close range. In just less than a second of fierce attack, the Twin Emperor's HP dropped by a full tenth. Admittedly, they were now elemental creatures, and as long as the weave had enough elemental magic supply, they wouldn't die. Of course, they could use the method of exchanging blows and wasting HP to win against Vashj. But if they had a choice, they definitely wouldn't use this method. If they couldn't defeat Vashj within her original HP, and in a situation where it was 2 against 1, that would be their failure. The pride in their hearts wouldn't allow them to fight this kind of ugly victory. In addition, they sensitively discovered that Duque didn't seem to want to kill Vashj, which further stimulated their nerves. This was their first battle after pledging allegiance to Duque. If they couldn't win beautifully, even if it wasn't Vashj, other demigods would join in the future. Then where would they stand? The twin emperors were telepathic. At the same time, the two emperors launched their attacks. The Nephilim king raised his hand, and a fire elemental that looked like Ragnaros appeared out of thin air in front of him. However, it didn't have a fire demon hammer. Instead, it had 2 blazing claws, each of which was the size of a round table. The fire elemental giant slammed its claws on the ground. A circle of flame spread out from the center of the fire elemental palm. The originally incomparably damp Coliphong throne was suddenly surrounded by a cloud of blazing steam. Under the high temperature and heat, water vapor appeared in the blink of an eye. Soon after, the entire platform turned into a world of flames that burned with specks of red sparks. At this moment, the fire elemental was not just on fire. The 5-story-tall black strider was already huge enough, but now, the fire elemental's body was rapidly expanding. It was almost 4 times the size of the black strider. Its huge body almost filled the entire Coliphong throne. As it launched its attack, the flames on both sides of its body even scorched the ceiling above the throne and the easternmost wall. The Black Strider, which was originally considered a mini-boss, let out a terrible cry under its barbaric charge. It then turned into charcoal and was finally swallowed by the flames. It was as if it was the fuel that made this blazing world of flames even more violent. Oh! Vashj was not surprised or angry. Instead, she laughed coldly. In this underwater space that was filled with water in all directions, the other party actually dared to play with fire with her? Was it tired of living? Or was it courting death? Without any hesitation, the huge wall behind Vashj's throne suddenly let out a loud, "Kacha" sound. Then, the entire wall shattered with a loud bang. In the huge hole that was the size of a football field, thousands of tons of seawater gushed in every second. The fire elemental world just now was naturally destroyed by the even more terrifying nature. Gurgle! Gurgle! The fire elemental giant that was still baring its fangs and brandishing its claws just a moment ago, when it opened its mouth and actually spouted out bubbles, everything was over. In the water level that was rapidly rising visible to the naked eye, in the water world that was almost filled with raging waves, Vashj swayed her long dark green snake tail. The bow and arrow in her hand had already been replaced by a glittering golden trident. He. I originally didn't want to use this move to bully you so early. Unfortunately, you're too insensible, actually using flames in my water world. A clear voice that was like a wind chime was full of demonic teasing. If it was on land, Vashj would have suffered a crushing defeat at any moment. But this was the bottom of the water that was nearly 1,000 meters deep. No matter how powerful the Kiraji twin emperors were, even with the support of the magic net, could they still evaporate the Viper Lake that was hundreds of square kilometers in an instant? Then they would not be demigods, but absolute true gods with Draenor's divinity. Unfortunately, in this broken world, where would the true gods come from? Vashj had thought that she would see a look of shock and anger on the faces of the twin emperors. She was disappointed. The Sword Emperor Vecnilaz raised his sword. The Demon Emperor Vec-Lor stood with his hands behind his back. Their behavior was definitely not normal. Sure enough, in the next second, Vashj suddenly discovered that the water temperature had changed. It was a high-speed drop, as if falling off a cliff. At first, it was just ice shards mixed in the water, but in the blink of an eye, everything in sight began to freeze. The pool surrounding the high platform of the throne, the elite subordinates led by the Black Strider, the hard high platform. Then the rising water level caused the surrounding ice walls to become taller and taller, pointing straight at the dome of the Viper Shrine that was more than 200 meters high. The Twin Emperor's goal was actually to freeze the entire Viper Shrine. This time, it was Vashj's turn to be shocked. Magic and martial arts dual cultivation? Sounds good. The Sword Emperor sneered. It's just that no matter which one, you're not at the peak. The Demon Emperor also sneered. You can suppress me in close combat. Your natural magic attainments are also above mine. But, although you're a water master on the surface, your true strength is only in nature, not ice. The Demon Emperor hit the nail on the head. Vashj's expression finally changed. It was true that she was an intellectual hero, but she also had extraordinary magic attainments. Unfortunately, that was only in nature, which was mainly thunder. She was not a mage in the traditional sense. Perhaps she could suppress the Demon Emperor in nature, but when it came to water, she was not as good as Vec-Lor. The Demon Emperor had dug a big hole for her to jump into. Chapter 1425. In the world of Warcraft, perhaps a patch made a god. Among so many professions, mages had always had the reputation of smashing their own children. Why? It was because of the infinite possibilities of shaping magic, which gave mages a lot of control and field control skills. No matter what kind of harsh situation it was, Pharaoh could always find the corresponding magic to deal with the enemy. Now Vashj was in a situation where she was at a disadvantage because her magic was too singular. In terms of one-on-one battles, since 10,000 years ago, Vashj, who had become a Naga, had always been in intrigue or various battles. It was impossible to know when she began to abandon Queen Azhara to go solo. It could only be inferred from the results that the blood and sweat that Vashj had paid to become the Naga whose power was second only to Queen Azhara's was absolutely unimaginable. That was not choosing a genius among a group of mentally retarded people, but a bloody path through a large group of insidious and cunning compatriots with powerful spellcasting abilities. Therefore, whether it was combat level or experience, Vashj was definitely above any of the twin emperors. After all, for more than 20,000 years, the Kiraji insect people had basically been in a sealed state, or the War of the Shifting Sands had only let them show their heads, and they were sealed again. The pampered twin emperors were really not Vashj's opponent when they were separated. With the two brothers added together, it was a completely different matter. With the Sword Emperor's cover, the Demon Emperor could cast spells safely. Looking at the ice around her, Vashj immediately realized that her situation was not good. The Logia's thunder element was much thinner. It was easy to explain from a scientific point of view. Any water with impurities was a good conductor because there were a large number of freely moving trace ions in the water. It was these ions of a certain concentration that under a certain voltage, usually very small, the positive and negative ions in the water would move in a certain direction, so the electric current would be generated. When the voltage was not high or normal, if there were no other impurities in the ice or it had not been polluted, generally speaking, it could be understood that ice did not conduct electricity, but if the ice had been polluted or encountered a very strong high voltage, it could still conduct electricity. The insulator that people usually talked about was relative. Even insulating plastic, when it encountered an extremely high voltage, would still conduct electricity. Now Vashti was in such a situation. If she forced herself to use thunder, it was not impossible, but the power would drop a lot, and the consumption of magic power would increase exponentially. However, she had no other choice. If she allowed the demon emperor to continue freezing the entire serpent temple, no, even just the coiled Fang throne, then her doomsday would come. Ice was solid. With such an abundant water source, the demon king could freely use ice to restrict her movement space. For Vashti, who relied on agility and intelligence, this was another form of suppression. That would drive her to death. Suddenly, Vashti raised her 6 arms high, all 6 palms facing upwards at the same time. In the thick and solid layer of ice that was like glass, the dazzling lightning that came from afar was refracted. After a full second, a series of continuous muffled thunder came faintly from the distance. Cracking sounds came from the huge layer of ice. Without a doubt, the layer of ice created by the Nephilim Emperor's surging mana was shattering like glass, and then collapsing from the outside. The sound was so loud that the people in Karazhan, who were watching the scene through the magic mirror, could not help but be speechless. At the scene, the sound of the layer of ice peeling off was almost deafening. In their field of vision, incomparably dazzling bolts of lightning were like invisible giant warhammers, fiercely smashing onto the surface of the ice. Crash! The sound of glass shattering was quickly swallowed up by the surging lake water. Mixed with ice shards, the lake water rushed towards the throne platform with an unstoppable momentum. Vek Lor's brows were tightly knitted together. He put his hands together, and the surrounding space suddenly burst with a bright brilliance. That was the expansion of the frost elemental domain again, with the last step below the platform as the boundary, attempting to use a smaller range but higher concentration of frost elemental domain to separate the fighting platform and the serpent temple into different elemental worlds. It won't be that easy. Vashti endured the Sword Emperor's sword slash on her tail, sent the Sword Emperor flying, and fiercely pounced towards the Demon Emperor. She did not know that the 2 brothers had the ultimate skill, Gemini teleportation. With a flash, she would have to face the Sword Emperor's obstruction again. Unknowingly, she and the twin emperors had entered a stalemate. She knew very well that if this continued, she would be the one to lose. Vashti could not help but let out a scream. This howl traveled far and wide. At this moment, in the ruins of the Twin Tower stronghold, the allies who were fighting fiercely suddenly discovered that the enemy's offensive had suddenly become fiercer. Countless Naga seemed to have entered a berserk state, madly attacking. What's wrong with these guys all of a sudden? Brawl Bearskin, who had turned into a war bear, slapped a male Naga down with a bare paw on the wall of the stronghold. The guy's stomach was broken and his intestines were all over the ground, but he still propped himself up like crazy, continuing to climb up from the corpses of his compatriots and killing his way into the stronghold. That's right, outside the temporarily built stronghold, there was already a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Countless Murlocs' corpses were piled on the beach by the water, all the way to the edge of the nearly 10-meter-high wall. Even with this slope, the Naga's side still could not directly attack, because the entire mountain of corpses was surrounded by the flames created by the flamethrowers. Before the flammable liquid burned out, don't expect this volcano to be extinguished. Generally speaking, this was true. But above the regular combat power, there were still hero-level powerhouses and leader-level monsters. The powerful combat power that Vashti had sent away were actually all on the Twin Tower stronghold. Yusler, A huge strange fish with a face similar to that of a male Naga, was the hidden boss of the Serpent Shrine Cavern. It itself was not too strong, but its water arrow and fountain special skills had become the magic weapons to suppress the Alliance's flamethrowers. Under its powerful spray of water, the flames that obviously would not be extinguished by water were washed away by the powerful flow of water along with the oil. Although it could not leave the deep water area, with its strong support, the Serpent Shrine Cavern, as well as several area bosses under Vasht's command, were able to kill their way over and attack the stronghold's defensive line. The Slave Pen, the Steam Cellar, and the Dark Swamp, the small bosses of these three areas, under the leadership of several powerhouses of the Serpent Shrine Cavern, fought against the heroes of the Alliance and the Horde. "Hold on!" Sal roared. He had just sent Warlord Calathares flying with a hammer, and was almost tricked by the Water Master Surthbaya. Chapter 1426. 15 years after the Dark Portal, Illidan lost to Arthas in Northrend and was forced to retreat to Draenor in the Outland. Illidan had been painstakingly managing his territory in the Outland. In 8 years, Vasht had firmly controlled Zangarmarsh. There was a saying that whoever controlled the water source would be invincible in the impasse. Vasht used the black technology from Draenei to create a large number of water pumps to extract water from the entire Outland. She also gathered a large number of elite water warriors. In the beginning, there were some tribal powerhouses who felt that gathering all the powerhouses of the Alliance and the tribes in the Outland to defend to the death was making a mountain out of a molehill. When all the powerhouses under Vasht came out, the Alliance army realized that they were lucky to be able to take advantage of the opponent's contempt and build a small fortress on the shore early. Apart from giant monsters like Yusler that could only stay in the deep water, there were also the three-headed snake Garzian from the Dark Swamp, the swamp giant Hogrifin, the mechanic Stylig, and so on. The biggest characteristic of these guys was their huge bodies. If any one of them were to fight with the heroes of the Alliance army, as long as the heroes were given enough time, they would definitely be exhausted to death. That was the problem, they appeared together. Just like a tank charge, if a tank came alone, everyone had 100 ways to deal with it. The easiest way was to go around and launch a fatal attack at the blind spot of the opponent's line of sight. A tank charge was really unstoppable, and there was no way to escape. Without this fortress to rely on, the Alliance army was very likely to be defeated by the terrifying attack of a group of giant monster leaders. Then, they would be chased all over the swamp and killed one by one like ducks being chased. However, with an extremely strong city wall, it was another matter. At first, the engineers didn't understand why they had to add a large number of triangular steel brackets behind the temporary city wall as auxiliary support. When the Naga ordered the Murlocs to fill the slope with corpses and pave the passage, everyone understood. Never underestimate the enemy's strength and madness. After the first layer of the city wall was breached, the almost completely sealed arrow tower that was specially not connected to the entrance of the city wall was still pouring spears and cannons out. The special design of the fortress could withstand the bombardment of cannons and heavy weapons very well. It could even allow the cannons in the second layer of the defense tower to directly bombard it without any hesitation. Anyway, the ones who died would definitely be the enemies. The empty space between the first and second layer of the fortress walls had turned into a horrifying slaughterhouse. Vasht's subordinates wouldn't have thought that after the Alliance reached the city wall, they would still have the time to use excavators to perform Azureflight's ultimate skill. In such a short period of time, they dug 36 large holes with a depth of more than 20 meters around the inner city wall, waiting for the giant monsters on Vasht's side to fall in. It was filled with abandoned steel bars that looked like barbs. Most of these were leftover bits and pieces from the construction of strongholds and other projects. Now, they were perfectly used as traps. For example, the swamp giant Agalfan had just stepped over the murlocs' corpses and rushed over the city wall when he fell into the pit. Between each pit was a 2-meter-wide path for the allied army to retreat. This width was enough for the Tauren, but for the swamp giant boss whose foot was more than 2 meters in diameter, it was worse than walking on a tightrope. Hogrifan fell to the ground in a sorry state, and was impaled by dozens of protruding steel bars. Roar! The giant, who was more than 5 stories tall, let out a mournful howl. Even though it was very painful, it wasn't a fatal injury for a swamp giant with strong vitality. At this moment, William leaped up high and raised his 2 increasingly famous artifact swords, Sharatol, Shadow Ripper, and Aramine, Shadow Plunderer. The 2 swords stabbed at Agalfan's throat at the same time. One red and one blue, 2 bright rays of light extended from the arc-shaped swords in his hands. In an instant, the swamp giant's throat was completely penetrated, and it went straight through to its brain. The swamp giant wasn't a low-intelligence creature like the slime monsters. With its brain destroyed, it couldn't have been more dead on the spot. Not every hero had William's attack power. Without 2 artifact longswords to pave the way, it was hard to say who would be the one getting killed instead. On the other side, Fandral Staghelm was very unlucky to encounter the 3-headed snake, Garzian. This super monster, whose lower body was like a lizard, swept its huge tail, and it smashed into Fandral like a battering ram. The violent impact sent him flying like a flying ball, and he crashed into the outer steel wall of the fortress. If he hadn't been able to transform back into his human form from his giant bear form, he would have been slapped into the wall so hard that he wouldn't even be able to dig him out. While Fandral was attracting Garzian's attention, Lilith's Windrunner struck a pose that looked like a golden rooster standing on one leg. She pulled the bowstring tightly with both hands, and used her long legs, which were second only to her sister's, to pull out a 2-meter-long bow that looked like an English longbow. Naturally, she wouldn't use ordinary arrows to pull out such a long bow. Those were the crossbow bolts that had almost been eliminated by time. Everyone realized that it was true that high-explosive bullets were used to attack small monsters. Armor-piercing bullets were fine against ordinary elite monsters, but the leaders that came out of the Kolaifang Reservoir all had a layer of water elemental armor, and the power of explosive weapons was greatly reduced. Compared to the overwhelming firepower of the flying battleships above their heads, the more primitive attacks of sharp weapons were more effective against these thick-skinned monsters. This time, Lilith directly shot an arrow and nailed one of Garzian's 3 heads to the base of a half-collapsed arrow tower. Roar! The 3-headed snake leader wasn't afraid of injury, but it was afraid of this kind of attack that limited its movements. Without the 3 heads to attack from multiple angles at the same time, its attack success rate would be further reduced due to its slow movements. It let out a mournful howl, and a thick sour smell flowed out of its mouth as it opened and closed. Mortals would feel dizzy just by smelling it. Any kind of giant monster would be terrifying when it went crazy. When it rushed into the fortress earlier, because of its large size and slow crawl, it had already suffered several rounds of full-force bombardment from cannon fodder, and was already seriously injured. Although Garzian, as a boss, was not a big deal in the entire Outland, this monster's dying blow was still quite terrifying. The other 2 heads that weren't nailed faced the sky at the same time, and the terrifying, acid spray, swept an almost 180-degree arc in the air. This spray covered almost half the low altitude of the battlefield. Chapter 1427. There was no way to block this kind of strong acid attack. Several flying frigates that had lowered their altitude in order to protect the stronghold were hit with bad luck. One of them was directly hit by the acid. Under the attack of the acid, the magic shield, which was not very strong to begin with, only resisted for less than a second before it burst into a dazzling blue light and shattered. The strong acid that could easily dissolve steel hit the side of the ship. At first, the frigate that was more than 40 meters long could barely maintain its shape. A few seconds later, like ice cream placed on a high-temperature oven, more than 100 people on the ship, along with the hull, turned into green slime and disintegrated in the air. After falling to the ground, it even dissolved pieces of the ground, making a terrible sizzling sound. The other frigates that were hit weren't much better off. It was inevitable that the magic shield would explode. Most of them were completely destroyed by a few cabins. The only good thing was that the corrosiveness of Garzian's acid was limited, and it would stop after corroding a few meters. Garzian twisted his remaining 2 heads frantically, trying to bite all the enemies in his attack range. This was the last of its madness. In the sky, a wyvern flew over Garzian's head. The one riding the dragon was the former chief of the Dragon Maw clan, Zulud. Now, it seemed, he was also a Death Knight. Technically speaking, he was actually a forgotten warrior. Because his fighting style in life was to ride a dragon, he could only become a mediocre dragon knight after death. The Dragon Sleep Temple refused to recognize the wyvern subspecies as a dragon. Ready. Jump! Just as Zulud finished shouting, Orgrim, who had been sitting on the back of the dragon, immediately jumped down, performing a heavenly justice. It couldn't be helped. Grom Hellscream had already retired. Although the Horde had many heroes, it was an indisputable fact that they lacked a raider. Originally, Sal had the talent, but he was the chief. Only Orgrim would be able to do it. The snake-like long neck kept twisting. Garzian, whose head had been nailed to death, didn't notice the threat falling from the sky at all. Ha! The first to jump down was Orgrim. He did a forward somersault in the air and perfectly concentrated all the impact force into the hammerhead. This, Thorny Branch Warhammer, was a good item from the Kiraj Holy Temple. It had a standard hexagonal hammerhead, and it felt more like the Hammer of Destruction that he was used to. Although he had the Frosted Warhammer that Ajrian had dropped, the quality of the Kiraj Shrine was already slightly higher than the Kiraj Ruins. Also, the Frosted Warhammer was a one-handed hammer, while this one was a two-handed one. Could the power compare? The second to jump down was Zulud. He was holding an Anubisath Warhammer, which was more suitable for him since he often needed to ride a mount. The 2 Horde heroes landed one after the other. Because the height of the target's head was different, they hit the target perfectly at the same time. Because they were too synchronized, it sounded like a boom. Accompanied by a loud bang, 2 snake heads exploded in an instant. The hammer that fell from the sky directly blew up the remaining 2 heads of Garzian. This meant that another vanguard monster from the Naga's side had fallen. Without the interference of these impact-type monsters, Pharaoh, who was more suitable as a cannon like Anastrian, was much more at ease. Without Jaina and Duque, he would be the undisputed number 1 mage in the Alliance. The largest magic amplification tower in the fortress naturally belonged to him. A series of incantations sounded, and the entire magic tower shone with a strange light. The elf-style arc-patterned magic arrays on it became brighter one by one. At the highest level, a magic array expanded beyond the area of the tower itself and spread into the void. Then, as this magic array expanded, 3 smaller magic arrays formed a triangle and expanded one by one beside this magic array. Then, 12 huge fireballs appeared in the air one by one. These 12 fireballs formed a standard circle outside the magic tower, like the 12 o'clock positions on a clock. Then, there was a continuous frenzied attack, as if it was the wrath of heaven. Every second, hundreds of fireballs the size of millstones split from the 12 huge fireballs and exploded toward the Naga troops who were attacking the fortress. Unlike the crude and biased bombardment of the flying fleet, the Sun King's fireballs were more accurate. Like a sniper rifle, they accurately smashed into the head of every Naga. The performance of the heroes on the Alliance's side was so outstanding that those who were not sober might really think that the Alliance had the upper hand. That was wrong. The ruins of the Twin Towers were located in the center of the swamp. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was the hinterland of Vashch's lair. The Alliance played airborne and defensive attacks. It would be great if they could invest 2,000 troops at most. However, Vashch could easily catch tens of thousands of murlocs here as cannon fodder, and over 10,000 Naga could drown this small fortress. What's more, this time, the Naga's flying snake army no longer held back. The overwhelming flying snakes could be said to be a comprehensive three-dimensional attack. The unique bang-bang sound of the 40mm octuple bang cannon had not stopped since the beginning of the battle. Even though they knew that the continuous firing would easily break, no one dared to stop. There were too many flying snakes. It was different from the single charge from west to east. Under the command of the leader, some of them climbed to a height of 500 meters outside the range of the anti-aircraft cannons and then dived down. Some used the clouds as cover and moved in a snake shape to attack. Some used the huge mushrooms unique to the swamp as cover and took a detour to attack. The problem was that the range of the bang-bang cannon in the early days of the Alliance was too short. It only had an effective range of 500 meters. Not only was it slightly shorter than the original 700 meters range, but it was also particularly harmful to the barrel. The original version was a 2-pound cannon and had a special mechanical design that was especially suitable for long-term automatic firing. This counterfeit version was actually a large-caliber shotgun. It was not the same thing at all. Relying on human hands to shake often meant that the mechanical precision and automation were seriously insufficient. Some of the bang-bang cannons would explode on their own without the enemy attacking them after firing for a long time. Of course, the dwarves were also ruthless people. They knew that it was very likely that they would explode. The dwarf gunners sitting on the gun seats in the middle of the 4 barrels on the left and right wore 2 sets of armor and continued to fire. A set of leather armor inside and a set of plate armor outside. As for what would happen when the barrel exploded, it would depend on luck. Even though the anti-aircraft cannons were firing so desperately, many airships were still hit by the high-density attack of the flying snakes. At this moment, a destroyer had a gap in the tight air defense net because 2 anti-aircraft cannons had accidentally exploded. The flying snakes swarmed forward. Even in just 5 seconds, the other cannons had already filled the gap. But it was too late. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.